Hello, this is the final day of our conference, and in the meantime, we've become almost insiders of the Museum of Krakow.
Because I must tell you one thing. We are not museum people, as much as we are museum lovers. We are linguists. And we see a very interesting thing here, that there is a close parallel between a museum and the language. Language, sounds or letters, they won't work if you don't combine them into words, into bigger units, which then you combine into something even greater, a poem, a novel. The same thing is about a city. You take individual people, you take some buildings, some institutions like museums, and only then can they work like that fantastic city that we're talking about.
In the meantime, we've become insiders enough to be let into what used to be the director's study. However, with the new interest taken into the museum, with the museum taking over new roles, this will now serve people of Krakow and all the visitors.
So you've had a sneak peek into a place that no one has ever seen. Well, apart from the director, I believe. But we will now have to proceed to the conference room. But before that, something which is an absolute hallmark of Krakow, which is very special and has been with us since 1240s, since the times of the pony horse, the Laikonik, which we had an opportunity to see on the very first day. Bugle call, broken mid-note by a Tatar, Mongol arrow, is another hallmark of our city.
And dates back to the 13th century raids, just like the Laikonik hobby horse you saw yesterday on the second day of our conference.
Wow, it's absolutely impossible to believe that this is the third day of the conference.
Well, shouldn't we rather say a genuinely exciting journey through a great many cities, countries and continents, as well as through various ideas, viewpoints and perspectives.
You're absolutely right. That's a much better version. Good morning.
Good afternoon and good evening.
Yesterday, we first listened to our distinguished guest, Soy Aksoy from Turkey, speaking about museums, from being for visitors to being for citizens. The presentation provoked a great many questions and comments.
Yes, you were very active during our Q&A sessions yesterday, for which we are very grateful and hope to see the same level of activity, involvement and interaction today.
Mrs. Aksoy's keynote was followed by an address from Spain by Joan Roca y Albert, who spoke about the City Museum in strategic city planning.
We then had two voices from Poland, from Katarzyna Jagodzińska, who discussed activating city museums in strategic city planning,
and from Konrad Schiller, from the Wola branch of the Museum of Warsaw, who explained to us the hybrid identity of a district of the capital city.
Then came the Ignite session with as many as 7 statements that launched so many questions and answers that the break had to be cancelled off.
And we immediately rushed into the last session.
With Sarah Henry from the US, who discussed art and data, exploring subjectivity and objectivity in who we are, visualizing New York City by the numbers.
Followed by Sasha Price, who invited us to talk about feelings, a new permanent exhibition in the Cologne City Museum.
The last speaker for the day being Catherine Cole from Canada with City Museums. Can a virtual museum replace the physical?
Before we move on to introducing today's agenda, let us present some housekeeping remarks.
Could we request that all the participants mute their microphones unless they take the floor? This will reduce the extra noise and protect you from coming unexpectedly into everyone's view.
ICOM kindly requested that we notify you that all the sessions are recorded and will be available later, to which, by the way, you agreed while registering for the conference. Therefore, if you do not agree to participate in a recorded session, please switch from participating on our platform to the live stream on the Museum of Krakow YouTube channel.
In order to have the best experience of the conference, we suggest that you use the active speaker view. We also hope for this event to be as interactive as possible and do count on you asking questions during our Q&A session. Please do it via our chat. We'll refer the questions to the speakers and read them out for the rest of the participants.
And a very kind note to our distinguished speakers. Extending your presentation does steal time from the questions and answers sessions.
The first of them will follow the first 3 lectures.
Well, our more virtual forms have already hinted at the content of this session, so without further ado,
may we invite Junichi Kobayashi from Japan to present the COVID-19 pandemic and the role of city museums.
So today my theme is the COVID-19 pandemic and the role of the city museums. In today's world of globalization, people, things, and information can easily transcend time and space and move back and forth across the world in a flash. The COVID-19 virus has spread across borders and passed from person to person with alarming speed, unleashing an assault on the world that has left deep scares. The mark left by COVID-19 has been especially pronounced in densely populated cities. Many city museums around the world have been forced to close their doors temporarily and permanently, and to cancel or postpone their planned projects due to declarations of a state of emergency or lockdown in the wake of what could be seen as a human crisis. Cities are already facing a variety of as yet unsolved persistent issues, including environment, population, ethnic daily living, and other concerns. However, this pandemic has brought hardship and difficulty to museums in cities all over the world. They had never experienced before. So just what should we be doing? I would like to propose the promotion of cross-cultural communication, or the coming together of museums. As an initial first step, before exploring that idea in more detail, I'd like to review the presentation I myself made at the CAMOC session during the ICOM Kyoto conference in September 2019. The basic premise of my presentation was that flourishing in intercultural exchange leads to mutual inspiration, fusion, revitalization, and ultimately development. Historically speaking, cultures will more often than not influence each other and blossom in different locations when spread and shared. In other words, societies have flourished greatly by proactively transplanting and observing different cultures. On the other hand, as that trend intensify a unique local culture nurtured since old times and treasured by local people could be swallowed up by globalization and is extinguished. For example, the local culture that has been lovingly nurtured in a certain place forms. Forms are small universe over time, as symbolized by festivals, performing arts, and other seasonal events. As the local traditional culture, it serves as the bedrock of community existence. It may be too simplistic and short-sighted to view culture as a conflict between global and local concepts in the first place. Instead, we could consider the meeting of cultures as causing a form of mutual chemical changes, in which the different cultures become deeply intertwined over time and influence each other. The important thing here is the intertwined, the process of transformation in which two cultures influence each other. You could say that the most essential thing is to research and appropriately present a transformation process that considers what changed and how and didn't change. A process that declares that through the undulating waves of time, these changes happened, and that is what created the culture we have today. People involved in museums work can help citizens consider their own culture through exhibitions, collections, and other museum activities that explores this type of transformational process. Having said that COVID-19 didn't exist at the time of the ICOM Kyoto 2019. At that time, no one imagined the imminent arrival of a disaster that would wreak havoc on humanity as a whole. No one was thinking we would experience the kind of pandemic. Today, less than 2 years later, the world is in a terrible state. To prevent the spread of infection, many cities introduced lockdowns. A state of emergency was declared 3 times in Tokyo, with the third one still ongoing as of today. And the Edo-Tokyo Museum was forced to close its doors for over 6 months in total. In truth, we have had to cancel or postpone a total of over 200 large and small projects. The COVID-19 pandemic is imposing fundamental change on everyone's lives across the world. People have felt considerably anxious and impatient, and those feelings have even resulted in hate crimes and other criminal activities in some locations. Under what conditions are people living their daily lives now in every corner of the world? While the degree may differ between countries and cities, it would appear that people are experiencing difficulties beyond description. In Tokyo, any outings that are not absolutely necessary or urgent are restricted. Body temperature checks are wearing of masks, and the disinfecting of hands are all mandatory. Cafes and bars have seen their opinion hours restricted or being forced to close temporarily. Such measures are essential as long as infections are spreading rapidly. Being forced to keep your distance from other people is something we haven't experienced before. Some people are experiencing a type of sensory deprivation caused by the prolonged requirement for self-restraint in their daily life. In some cases, this can disrupt cognitive function, and excessive stress can lead to physical and mental anxiety disorders. I have never been more convinced than I'm now of just how invaluable art and culture are to human beings. When you experience pent-up feeling, times are tough, and you can't see a way out. Art and culture can prove themselves to be a valuable sources of latent resilience with the power of resist, recover, and restore. Here I would like to mention one Edo Tokyo Museum's initiative by way of example. In the wake of COVID-19, we held an exhibition entitled Edo Tokyo Seen Through Blue, Edo Tokyo Seen Through Blue, to express gratitude and respect for medical doctors, nurses, and others who continue to work despite the risk of infection. The collection brought various works based on the blue theme under one roof, including the spar work by Katsushika Hokusai called The Great Wave of the Coast of Kanagawa. And it depicts people on a boat being tossed around helplessly by the crashing waves of the great ocean. The contrast with a brave Mount Fuji in the background is a wonderful condensation of movement and stillness. I'm sure I'm not the only one who is awe of the roughness and beauty of nature that exceeds the realms of human comprehension. Hokusai has had a profound influence on artists, including Dutch artist Vincent van Gogh and French composer Claude Debussy. So let's say once more, never have art and culture been as sorely needed as they are now. The pandemic will eventually be brought under control, while people will need to explore new ways of living their lives. They will undoubtedly adapt the post-COVID world. Already we can draw strength from the solidarity witnessed between people, however big or small, to overcome their shared distress. In any case, lives will change even more dramatically in the future, and I want us to explore and anticipate necessary social issues as we enter the coming age. We also want to see museums collaborate and share the unique culture of each of our cities through irrepressible individual museum collections that are viewed as the heritage of the human race. Let's consider these collections an opportunity to learn in detail about the history of a city establishment, of the lives that city residents have woven over time. We would like to advance our understanding while naturally, mutually respecting each city's unique culture. We want to see the disaster wrought by COVID-19 family incorporated as one of each city's memories. To do what? To do that, all museums should cooperate more vigorously than ever under a power of culture banner. If we museum people work hand in hand, surely we can help promote human solidarity, even if only by a small amount. People have experienced smallpox, cholera, 1980s influenza, and other infections, diseases in the past. In the Middle Ages, the plague is thought of to have wiped out Europe. But remember, those dark times were followed by the brilliant Renaissance period. Could we CAMOC Museum's members not plan an exhibition together around the common theme, such as infections, diseases, and the human race, for example? It would be the greatest pleasure to see such an endeavor turned into a touring exhibition. Let's explore the idea together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Junichi Kobayashi-san. And now we have the next speaker.
Let's welcome our guest from the other side of the globe, Margaret Anderson from Australia.
Speaking about power to the people, political protest, and the City Museum.
Thank you very much, and good evening from here, everybody. I'm just about to share my screen with you, so hopefully that will all work. Is that clear to everybody? Great. Well, can I just begin in particular by thanking our colleagues at the Krakow Museum who've made it possible for all of us to come together despite all the difficulties, even from all over the globe. Now, just a few weeks ago, the old Treasury building finally opened its new exhibition, Protest Melbourne. This was originally planned to launch in 2020, but like many programs the world over last year, it was a victim of the COVID pandemic. Long before it was a history museum, the old Treasury building was the city office of the Governor of Victoria. It still is. And as a result, all legislation passed by the Parliament of Victoria has been signed into law in our building. So, not surprisingly, many of the protests documented in this exhibition have taken place literally on our doorstep. Now, as it happened, our delayed opening came as nations around the world were experiencing controversial protest. In some countries, including in Melbourne, they were opposing the reimposition of COVID restrictions. We are now on our fourth lockdown. In previous months, long-running protests in Myanmar brought thousands into the streets in defence of democracy, provoking a violent response from the military regime there. Debating the right to protest safely seems to be important in our cities right now, and museums like ours have a part to play in that. In Melbourne, the history of protest is as old as the city itself. Melburnians first took to the streets in the 1840s, less than a decade after the town was founded. And they've been protesting loudly and vigorously ever since. Some of those early protests were very successful. By 1856, men in Victoria had gained the right to vote, and some workers had gained an 8-hour day. They were amongst the first in the world to achieve that. Programs presented at the Old Treasury Building chart the growth of democratic government in Victoria, along with many other themes relevant to urban life. Protest brings those two themes together. It has been a recurring feature of political life in the city through the decades. Over the years, many issues have brought Melbourne citizens onto the streets in protest. And obviously, we couldn't hope to cover all of them in one small exhibition. We chose instead to group the protests thematically, with an emphasis on issues that still resonate today. Those we chose were First Nations protest, women's rights, workers' rights, the peace movement, gay rights, and the environment. Now, it's interesting or sad, depending on how you look at it, to find out how many of today's concerns can trace their origins well into the past. Take women's rights, for example. The first organisation to demand political rights for women in Australia was formed in Melbourne in 1884. It was a genteel association of ladies, literate, well-connected, and their weapons of choice were the petition and the deputation to senior men in government, most of whom had offices in the Old Treasury Building. Here is one deputation setting out in 1898. It looks pretty formidable, I think you'll agree. Not for these ladies, the noisy street marches that would come later. But those women were energetic and determined. One of their petitions, the so-called Monster Petition of 1891, gathered 30,000 signatures and stretched to a length of 260 metres, much to the consternation of the members of Parliament who received it. Now, unfortunately, those women needed all of their determination. Although women in the sister colony of South Australia gained the vote in 1894, the much more conservative Victorian Parliament refused 19 successive suffrage bills before finally granting women the vote in 1908. Now, the main focus of those early feminists was the suffrage, but they also campaigned for better working conditions for women and against domestic violence. These were issues that continued to inspire women's protests through both world wars and into the 1960s, until women's liberation burst onto the scene, demanding an end to all forms of discrimination against women. Those were heady days, and the women's liberation movement achieved a lot. How sad, then, to see that domestic violence is still prevalent and, if anything, actually increased here during the pandemic lockdowns. While sexual harassment in the workplace and violence against women are prevalent everywhere, as global movements like the #MeToo campaign shows only too clearly. So for now, the protests continue. First Nations people also have a long history of protest in Victoria. Although the armed resistance was quickly overcome, Kulin leaders soon proved adept at using the mechanisms of representative government to argue for justice. The first protest march by Kulin people took place in 1876. They were calling for freedom of movement and land rights, a campaign that would go on until late into the 20th century and is still an issue today. Other live issues for First Nations people include honest recognition of First Nations history and the shameful incidents of Black deaths in custody, the Australian equivalent of the global Black Lives Matter campaign of 2020 to 2021. And there can be little doubt that some of the large protest movements achieved their aims. In the early 1970s, huge demonstrations protested against Australia's involvement in the Vietnam conflict and demanded an end to the conscription of young men into the armed forces. The Vietnam moratoriums were one factor in the election of a progressive federal government after many years of conservative dominance, and in Australia's withdrawal from Vietnam. Similarly, the women's rights and gay rights campaigns of the 1970s and 80s helped lead to the abolition of discriminatory legislation and ultimately to changes in the marriage laws to allow same-sex marriage. Rallies to preserve workers' rights in the early years of this century helped to reverse conservative workforce legislation that had tried to remove hard-won industrial rights. These were huge demonstrations, as some of these images show. And pointing to successful protests of the past, we hope might help to inspire young people to have more faith in the possibility of change. More recently, of course, the issue of global climate change has once again brought young people onto the streets in large numbers. A series of schools strike for climate rallies were held in 2018 and 2019 and attracted large crowds across the generations. Several of those took place on the forecourt of the old Treasury building, and we show some of the banners carried in those protests in the gallery. Protesters represent the breadth of the political spectrum, using the same format of chants, banners, and moving crowds that sweep up to gathering sites to listen to passionate speakers. Less popular causes have also found a place on the streets of Melbourne over the years, and more recently, they have included those opposing lockdown and vaccinations. As our exhibition suggests, Victorians have been enthusiastic protesters for a very long time, and it is probably fair to say that we have taken our right to protest rather for granted. Even though we may not agree with every issue, most Victorians would defend the right to demonstrate for those beliefs in public. But the legal position is not quite so clear, and restrictions associated with the pandemic complicated matters even more. Australia is one of few democratic nations in the world that does not have a legal instrument to guarantee the right to protest. We have no federal Bill of Rights. Now, generally, that hasn't affected the outcome very much. Most Australians assume that they have the right to protest and do so enthusiastically. And mostly, when challenged, the courts have upheld that position, arguing that the right to protest is assumed in the Constitution to safeguard a healthy democracy. Nevertheless, Australia has 3 tiers of government, federal, state and local, and 2 Australian states have legislated to create clear legal rights within their jurisdictions. In Victoria, a specific Charter of Human Rights includes the right to peaceful assembly, freedom of expression, and freedom of association, all of which are essential to the right to protest. But of course, those rights are never absolute. Even in ordinary times, they preclude actions that involve trespass, vandalism, or racial or other vilification. But as we all found last year, in extraordinary times, when governments declare a state of emergency, the right to protest can be further limited. During the months of pandemic lockdown in Melbourne in 2020, all Victorians were subject to the directives of the Chief Health Officer, someone most of us didn't even know existed before that. At times, those restrictions included not travelling more than 5 kilometres from home, not leaving home for more than an hour a day, maintaining an appropriate social distance from others, and wearing a mask in public. Gatherings in public or private, for that matter, were strictly limited. People could be fined for ignoring those directives, and many were. Most simply complied with the regulations and supported the efforts to control the spread of the virus. But it is fair to say that protesting legally under those conditions was almost impossible, and those who tried met with strenuous police enforcement. But something else changed as well. Even Victorians who might normally have supported protest activity found that they did not. There was a sense that gathering to protest, even for otherwise exemplary causes like Black Lives Matter, for example, was irresponsible, endangering public health, and many disapproved. The Social Democratic Premier of Victoria said very clearly that he disapproved. In September 2020, he said, "It's not the time to protest, regardless of what you're protesting about." Even as Victorians began to emerge from lockdown in December 2020, that unease at large public gatherings lingered. The march against sexual harassment and continuing violence against women that took place in March this year was one of the first to attract a really large crowd since the pandemic began. And even then, many who might have gone stayed away. The pandemic has raised interesting questions about the right to protest in a democracy and the reasonable limits to that right. It has also raised some complex legal questions about the legitimacy of some criminal charges, for example, that were levied on protesters last year at the height of the lockdown. In education programs presented in association with the protest exhibition, we will ask students to consider those issues and perhaps to debate them once they return to their classrooms. Listening to their views will be very interesting. It would be nice to be able to gauge general public opinion also, but at present it's much more difficult to do that while COVID protocols limit the use of touch screens and other devices in exhibitions. We're still exploring whether the website is a viable alternative. And as the cases of those charged with offences during the pandemic move through the courts, we will watch with interest to see the legal outcomes. My daughter, who's a lawyer, rather thinks that many of those cases will simply be thrown out without conviction. But I guess only time will tell if she's right. Will the tradition of protest change permanently in Melbourne as a result of the pandemic? It's too soon to tell, but I rather hope it won't. It's a strong tradition and one that has a very long history. But whatever the outcome, our museum intends to continue to document it and to engage our visitors in the ongoing debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margaret Anderson.
The last speaker in this session is Annemarie de Wildt from the Netherlands,
who will pose or perhaps answer the question, who has the right to the city?
using Amsterdam as her case study.
Who has the right to the city? The case of Amsterdam. Before I start my presentation, I would like to apologize for being so unpresent this week. This is a photo that was taken a couple of days ago when the Golden Coach landed on the Amsterdam Museum. We are about to start. Next week is the opening of a big exhibition on this iconic carriage, and I'm rather obsessed with it now. I'm very busy with it now, but it's great to be able to be here with you and to present this story about right to the city, and also to move away a little bit from this Golden Coach project. I would like to start with this another iconic symbol of Amsterdam, the I Amsterdam letters. This was a brand that started a way to brand the city that was introduced, was designed in 2004. And later became the subject of a lot of criticism. It was started by a branding agency, Kessels Kramer, in a request to make a new campaign for the city, and one of the symbols were these huge I Amsterdam letters in front of the Rijksmuseum. And you could not go to Amsterdam without taking a selfie or a photo in front of these letters, which was also, and the logo was also used for these city cards, etc. The letters were also imitated in quite some other cities around the world. But what's interesting, that later they became the symbol of mass tourism, but it started out as something completely different. It started out as a way to celebrate the Amsterdam population in all its diversity, and not so much aimed as tourists, but also at Amsterdam population itself. So regarding our age, skin color, we all bike, had this wonderful family you see on the right. And so these are all images of a very diverse Amsterdam, but later had the symbol turned into the I Amsterdam logo turned into the symbol of mass tourism, as presented in this work of art we acquired a couple of years ago at about the same time as it was decided to take the letters down. It's a work by David Veldhoen, and he presents the city as being taken over and almost ruined by mass tourism. There were other artists. So in my presentation, I'd like to focus on some of the work of artists dealing with this question, who has the right to the city? This is a very interesting group of people who actually call themselves Van wie is de stad, to whom belongs the city. And they found this way of protesting. They designed the posters. So one of the symbols of this mass tourism is also the fact that the shops, the cafes in the center became less and less diversified, and more like this monoculture symbolized in the notorious Nutella shops. And these posters can be downloaded and placed all over the city, which actually happened quite a lot. And yeah, as I said again, had this I Amsterdam logo increasingly have without a lot of attention for the origins of the logo, has celebrating the diversity of the Amsterdammers. It had become a symbol of mass tourism, and therefore it had to go, leaving tourists looking for this spot to take their selfie. The letters weren't thrown away; they were moved to other places of the city, like in the Amsterdam Southeast area, where they serve as a way, where they hope that people would be attracted to that part of the city. And then, of course, Corona came, and a lot of people were suddenly discovered the center of Amsterdam, discovered its beauty, discovered the fact that it was, belonged to them. They could actually even use it as a playground. This is an image of the summer last year when the lockdown was sort of a little bit severe, and artists used the red light district to do art projects, but still now we are again this week there were articles in the newspaper referring to the fact that this is a pre-corona poster, but this is happening again. That the house prices are still going up. The profit is going. When the profit is going up, the leefbaarheid, the livability is going down. And despite Corona, or maybe because of Corona, because people are saving money, the investing in houses has only continues to increase. These again, it's the same group of people using posters to campaign against what's happening on the real estate market in Amsterdam. With people buying houses to start Airbnbs. The person on the right is a nephew of our present king, Bernard van Oranje, who is also big in the real estate market and who is sort of like a symbol of this. That had this increasing group of people buying houses to invest and not so much to live in. It's a big change from the situation in the 1970s and 80s when the right to the city was taken. These posters are nice, but they don't have a huge effect. And in the 1970s and 80s, people took it into their own hands. Large parts of the city were there were a lot of people, a lot of buildings empty in the city, and they were squatted and turned into alternative spaces, creative spaces. Also for a lot of the people that moved from Suriname to the Netherlands. This was around 1975, the independence of Suriname. There was a large housing shortage, especially because the housing corporations and a lot of private house owners didn't want to rent the spaces to people from Suriname, and therefore in this southeast area, a lot of houses were squatted, and this was the beginning of this area as a very area where a lot of people of Surinamese descent are living. Squatting had this right to the city to be taken into your own hand was stopped in 2010 when squatting was prohibited, and now there's something like anti-squat living, which is a solution for some of the many young people who cannot find a house. But it's very precarious, and you can be thrown out of, asked to leave your house within a couple of weeks. So this housing shortage really means that there's a huge it's excluding a lot of people to be able to live in the city. There's an article that refers to the lack of teachers on high schools because they cannot find affordable housing in Amsterdam. It's a real problem. So now, to end, I would like to focus on two different neighborhoods in Amsterdam and artists who have started projects there. Artists and people living in the neighborhood have started projects there. When you look well, you again see the Amsterdam letters, but this time they're covered with Verdedig Noord, Defend North. North is the part of Amsterdam above the river, which has always been traditional working class area. But now a lot of people move in because the houses there are still a little bit cheaper. And there's a lot of tension with the old people. And Massi Hutak, he's the guy on the right. He writes books about it. He raps about it, stressing the fact that this old North had the people who used to live there for generations have to be, and that includes the old working class group that always lived there, and the migrant groups and families, that it has to be defended. And he does it in a very original way by rapping about it, making theater about it, and for instance, with this rap song, Designer Bike, and this is typically the kind of bike bought by the young urban professionals moving into the area. Now these bikes cost like 2,000 euros. He bought one and saying, you know, now I adapt myself to your lifestyle. Please also adapt to me. And as a museum, we really like this way of protesting. So we actually acquired the bike for our museum collection together with all the objects around the protests. Another example is the Kollekitbuurt in Amsterdam West. Also, it's an area that was declared like one of the worst neighborhoods in Amsterdam in 2010. A lot of artists moved in and started projects, had to make the neighborhood nicer, better to live in. And later this process of gentrification started with building of this new apartment. But what is nice and reassuring, that some of the initiatives the artists took in these previous years, like the Radio Kollekitbuurt, arranging meetings with people, trying to work on like the cohesion and the relations between the neighborhood, that they to some extent continued into this new gentrified Kollekitbuurt. For instance, this project of growing vegetables became part of the new apartment buildings. And we're as a museum, we are in close contact with the people who organize these kind of meetings, like Voort Lakbier, and one of his slogans is "Stories narrow the distance between people." This is exactly, of course, also what we as a museum would like to do. So I would like to end with this project, which we did some couple of months ago, when it was just because of the lockdown possible to do it. It's the theater collecting stories project in the Jacob Geel area, where Fuad, together with people from the museum, collected the stories of, this is also an area on the brink of gentrification. These buildings will be torn down, but before the people left, the stories were collected, some of the objects were collected, and for a couple of weeks, a sort of mix between the theater performance and the museum was set up in this Jacob Geel area, to somehow preserve some of the stories, of the objects, of the relations between people that existed there before it would disappear. I thank you very much for your attention. I hope I was sort of in time.
Thank you very much. In this way, the first session is over, and now we are moving to the questions.
The first question is to Mr. Kobayashi. What plans have you put in place in the COVID-19 protocol to protect the staff of your museums and to protect the visitors?
We hired tour guide, or mostly we hired from outside. But of course, our museum staff have to engage to secure of the visitors' safety.
Thank you very much for this explanation. And now we have two questions to Margaret. The first is, how are communities and governments reacting to the exhibition so far?
It's very early days. Thank you for the question, Joanna. And the rather silly thing is that we opened the exhibition and it was open for 2 weeks and then we promptly went back into lockdown. So the honest answer is that it's too early to say, but there has been a lot of interest in the material that's on the website, and we've had a lot of interest from schools who are, when they hear about it, are booking. So we are hoping that people will come. It was interesting too, in that one of the local television stations, one that we don't very often attract, actually approached us before we even sent out any media material and wanted to do a segment on it. So we are hoping that people will be interested and that they'll come along, and that we might actually be able to participate in some of the discussions that they have.
And the other question that we have to you is, how is protest communities and activism institutionalized in the museum in the city? By the way, could you perhaps suggest some more literature, articles on the subject?
I can certainly do that. I might do that in a response to the chat after this, perhaps. Institutionalized, by that, I presume the question, Kirsten, you mean, are we collecting, and what sort of things are we collecting? I'm not sure if that's what you mean, but if that is what you mean, then what we have tended to do is go out to some of those protests and try and ask people if they're prepared to let us have some of the material that they're producing, and then talking to people about why they're there and why they feel important, that the issues are important, and trying to record those memories as well. Now, we haven't been doing this for long enough to have been able to record material from those older protests, of course, but there is a great deal of material already, mainly in libraries, I have to say, rather than museums. That there is a lot of material in libraries, and there are many oral histories, and we've been able to access those as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for this answer. And now we have a question from Joana Monteiro to Annemarie. Could you briefly explain the connection between Nutella and monoculture, as the artist labeled it? I couldn't get it. Another thing, from all those examples you have mentioned, which do you think will remain more relevant in the near future?
Thank you very much, Joanna, for the questions. Yeah, Nutella shops, it's a recent phenomenon. It started around 2009, when a lot of shops in Amsterdam were turned into pancake and waffle shops, and then pancakes spread with a lot of Nutella on top of them. It's like calorie bombs, and they were suddenly they were all over, and tourists were eating them. A lot of people were saying this because they had the munchies after smoking too much joints, and they needed some calories, or. But it wasn't just the visual presence of these shops in the city, and the fact that a lot of other maybe more interesting shops were taken over now by these pancake waffle shops and then thickly spread with Nutella. But it was also the smell. There was this smell of waffles and pancakes, and sometimes mixed with hashish, which somehow very much designated the center of Amsterdam as a tourist place. So that's why the protest, and in Amsterdam they became known as the Nutella shops. What is more? Your other question was what will be more relevant in the future? I think for the museum, had these cooperations with people in the various neighborhoods, and trying to find out how are we going to tell the story of these neighborhoods. I mean, that's relevant, but it will change all the time. And as a museum, situated in the center of the city. You have to adapt to all these neighborhoods, maybe work in the neighborhood. It's exactly what we're going to do over the next couple of years. In September, the main venue in Kalverstraat will close. We move to another space, but we'll also very much move into the city in a process which Margaret probably also talked a little bit about, collecting the city, and which is also presenting the city. So this Jacob Geel Museum was a very interesting experiment, in a very small scale. You could actually walk through that building. The people had left, but the story stayed, and you could listen to them on earphone and see some of the artistic interventions. So now we're discussing how can you transfer that experience into the museum. So I still don't know what's most relevant, but we'll find out and we'll report. And there was another question. What was the other question? About the logo? Who posed that question? Oh yeah, how the interpretation changed. Yeah, it's interesting. I found it really interesting that something that starts as something to include all the citizens of Amsterdam, and even the local politicians, when they started to denounce this as a symbol of mass tourism, they had very little attention for the origin of the campaign, which was aimed at being excluding, and then it somehow turned into being something that was excluding actually the citizens.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this explanation. And, well, let's sometimes be sure that not being able to answer or not being sure what will happen is absolutely the right answer. Perhaps not the right decision was the one that we took to cut out the break, but we didn't want to ask the speakers to reduce their speaking time, and we wanted to ask as many questions as possible. For that reason, we've already had the break. The break is the past and now.
And now we're moving swiftly to our Ignite session. Yesterday's session was such a success, and there were so many questions asked about it that we hope that today's session will be equally successful.
Let's then not waste any of your time, and let's proceed straight to the session with another 7 videos. They are
Ivan Grinko from Russia, Participation in Museum Network, Technology and Efficiency.
Zuzanna Schnepf-Kołacz from Poland, the POLIN Museum and Partnership for the Waliców Heritage Site.
Kamil Stasiak from Poland, Museum Education as a part of Urban Heritage Management on an example of the Museum of Krakow.
Yvonne Mazurek from the US and Italy, tracing small-town memory in Pasolini's heritage documentaries towards a burgeoning city museum at Orte, of course in Italy.
Marco Edoardo Minoja, Samuele Briatore, and Antonella Andreotti from Italy, from Milan. 1 city, 20 museums, 4 districts, a plural vision for civic museums.
And a person already thanked for coordination, though I'm quite sure not thanked enough, Jelena Savic from Bosnia and Herzegovina and Portugal, Heritage and Design, constructing an imaginary museum of the city.
And the last presentation will be that by Hiromi Takao from Japan on creating opportunities for citizens to think about urban disaster prevention.
This block of 7 videos will obviously be followed by a questions and answers session, so please get your questions ready.
Good day, dear colleagues. I want to share with you some experience from participation in museum projects in Moscow. brief look at the museum landscape of Moscow. So as you can see, there are about 500 museums, and 100 museums is under control of the Department of Culture of Moscow. So that is why we will with the main part of this idea to organize crowdsourcing project Moscow Museums. As you can see, it lasted 11 days at the end of 2018. We can involve about 1,500 participants, and it was based on the online platform Active Citizen. This project consisted from 3 main blocks. I will primarily focus on the block ideas, but also participants had possibility to join some discussion about the museums and organize their own blogs. So here you can see the distribution of the proposed ideas from 300 participants. As you can see, the main interest was oriented on the customer-focused services, comfort of visiting, and so on. So with such important theme as museum in urban development and environment practically was ignored by our participants. That's stretching. This is the example of distribution of participants' activity. So the majority of participants proposed only 1 or 2 ideas, not more. So the average activity was low. Of course, there are a lot of very interesting ideas, and so there were some very, very strange. For example, add some fluffy animals in museums. I understand that everybody likes cats, me too, but such proposals were not very useful for us. But what after? At least about 1,000 ideas were chosen by museum experts, including independent experts, directors of museums, and so on. After it, we wrote voting, online voting. You can see that about 40,000 votes were given by participants, and 100 of best ideas were taken in vote. Here you can see the examples of ideas that were created by our participants, and I have to repeat that the majority of ideas were devoted to the comfort of visiting. So cafes, chairs, house, open hours, prices for tickets, and so on. But also there were some interesting ideas that were taken from Europe or world experience. For example, at quotes of poets or on the walls near museum. Here you can see the theme of discussion, but a main conclusion of this project that participants very often had a very archaic image of museum. That is why majority of proposed ideas were a little bit strange after me and couldn't be used in the real life. And also the majority of ideas were involved before crowdsourcing. So it was a kind of plebiscite so we were sure that we on the right way. And a year after, about 6 ideas were realized, all in process of realizing. Up to me, this experience were not absolutely successful, but maybe it could be useful for organizing online participation projects, because now during the COVID-19 it's so actual. Thank you for your attention. Big greetings from Moscow. Thank you. Good luck.
My name is Zuzanna Schnepf-Kołacz, and I'm from the POLIN Museum of the History of Polish Jews. I will talk about the Waliców heritage sites. You would ask, what is Waliców? So Waliców is the name of the street in the center of Warsaw, where the three pre-war buildings are situated. Those buildings are partially ruined. They are in a state of controlled ruin, and they seem to be intact almost from the end of the World War II. So these buildings have a very rich history. They were in the ghetto zone, Warsaw ghetto zone. They were also a place of very intensive fights during the Warsaw Uprising. So they are kind of place where the memory of Jews and memory of Poles meets in a very direct way. We call them a DNA of Warsaw because they can show us how the urban structure of the pre-war city looked like, how it was structured and how it conditions the people's life before the war. It is a very unique situation in Warsaw, where most of the city was destroyed during the war, during the Nazi occupation. So as we can see, the place is a very rich past, and although its history, for several years it was neglected after the war. So many such buildings were destroyed, and those three remained somehow, but they weren't renovated in any way. So in the 60s and 70s, people started to recall their history and started to fight for their identity as a historic place, as a heritage site. So Warsaw historians, students, artists, also urban activists, they started a grassroots initiatives in order to commemorate this place. Although those initiatives, the authorities still remain, they didn't react on this need expressed by Warsaw inhabitants. But at the same time, where the Warsaw was engaged in the heritage of the Waliców place, in Milan, in Politecnico di Milano, Italian architects started their own project about the Waliców history. So young Italian architects developed many projects how those buildings should be saved for the future generations. And we started as a POLIN Museum to collaborate with Professor Guido Morpurgo and Annalisa De Curtis from the Milan Politecnico di Milano. And we started to be engaged in this subject as a museum. Our main goal was to create a kind of network of people and to integrate various groups which were engaged in this matter of Waliców site. We started to organize many other initiatives, many events around the Waliców subject to animate this subject and to make it more public. We used our resources and we became the main actor of the whole process. Although it wasn't our intention because we were museum, historical museum, so there were other issues that we are engaged in. But it happened in this way, and we during the several discussions, debates, also exhibitions, the Waliców subject developed in a very different directions. It started to be considered as a heritage of Europe, not only Warsaw and not only Polish heritage, but also a worldwide heritage of a place that was destroyed during the war, but still is a kind of witness of the whole European history. It also gained many functions in the future, in a project that considered the future of the place. So it wasn't only a place, a memory place. It became an open place for the Warsaw inhabitants, and also for the people from abroad that came to visit the capital of Poland. It also started to be considered in a broader context of a green axis of the whole zone of Warsaw. And at the end, we gathered the whole opinions and ideas about the Waliców from very different actors and groups in a one publication. We gave this publication to the Warsaw authorities, who are the owner of the three buildings, in order to inspire them to further actions about this place. And in fact, the Warsaw authorities started to be interested in this place and to see a great potential for the city of Warsaw. And this is a new chapter in the history of the place. And we are just like standing on the threshold now. But this is a different story, and I hope that we can develop it in the further discussions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hello from Krakow. I'm glad that I can say a few words about urban planning heritage and its social impact in conjunction with museum education in annual CAMOC conference. Protection of historical monuments is mainly understood as creation of legal and financial condition for preservation, sometimes restoration, of their material structure. In the Polish law on the protection of historical monuments, the obligation of spreading the knowledge about the monuments is the last of the listed obligation of the owner. It does not appear among the obligation of the state. Public awareness and consequently social care is a key to slower degradation of historical buildings. This results less resources needed to maintain them and the consumption of less energy and non-renewable materials. Public awareness gives a better chance to saving monuments from destruction due to the grassroots resistance against their destruction or quicker reporting to the threats to the conservation departments. Awareness of the value of the place of residence has positive social effects. It promotes appreciation of citizens' living space. This builds a bond with place, enchanting the sense of security and the desire to care of the surroundings. Both the good quality of the surroundings and the sense of participation in the maintenance increase the self-esteem of residents, significantly affecting the quality of life. The responsibility of the museum for the landscape was the subject of the resolution of the ICOM General Assembly in Milan in 2016. In fact, the museum has the substantive resources, publication, content presented in the exhibition, competent staff, and social resources, contact with the community, to create awareness about the need to preserve elements of the cultural landscape and its conscious sustainable transformation on basis of knowledge of historical buildings. History gives us positive and negative examples of urban planning, providing an example to follow and the models which we should avoid. It shows how the governance and social system affected to the shaping of space. It teaches us to be cautious, even for enthusiastic concepts created by professionals, which do not always bring positive results. In Polish condition, this is particular importance. Faulty legislation combined with a weak emphasis on artistic education and that part of historical education, which relates to architecture and urban planning, results in a constant increasing of spatial house. Increasing awareness may result in better individual choices when it comes to living space, but it may also put a social pressure on those in power. One of the most important activities of Museum of Krakow, aimed at the popularization of knowledge on historical urban changes, was the Krakow 3D scientific project undertaken in 2004. It resulted in digital reconstruction of the buildings of Krakow, the mid-17th century, the transformation of Main Square from 11th century to the 18th century, and selected buildings. The effects of the work were presented in the form of temporary exhibition in Krakow and abroad, in publication, and continue to be used in the subsequent museum projects. The urban space, as a stage of events taking place in Krakow, is presented in most of educational activities. I will present only one example showing how the concept was shaped and adapted to building awareness of relationships between space and the lives of residents. It's about the classes devoted to the location of Krakow under the Magdeburg law. One of the key themes of the workshop is the story of the orthogonal layout of streets with a large market square in its heart and the buildings playing key function. The basic of the information from tour, the participants in groups prepared models of the medieval town located under the Magdeburg law. Recently, however, the content of the tour has been slightly modified. More attention is paid to the impact of geographical factor of the life of the city, especially the water network. It is pointed out that an increase in population density created challenges such as accumulation of waste and protection against epidemics. On the other hand, it's pointed out that a higher concentration of inhabitants make easier to gather water supply or defense. Finally, we are now trying to ensure that during recreating of the layout of a medieval town, the participants reuse waste. An important element in creating and raising awareness of value of urban heritage is to involve the community in the discussion about it. Museum of Krakow runs a series of debate called Krakow Colloquium, which has already included topics related to urban space. We are also currently launching the DNA of Krakow series, consisting the networking meetings to which we invite city activists. One of the main themes repeated every year will be the spatial order. The example set by museum itself, which operates in a historical building, is also important. Taking care of their condition contributes to preserving the value of the entire spatial arrangement. In short, there are 4 basic elements that allow the museum to be included in the process of urban heritage management by building public awareness. First, scientific activities and the use of the results. Second, education, including workshop. Third, the inclusion in the debate. And fourth, its own example in taking care of historical buildings. Thank you very much.
Tracing small-town memory in Pasolini's heritage documentaries towards a burgeoning city museum at Orte, Italy. My name is Yvonne Mazurek, and I'm pursuing doctoral research in cultural heritage science at Tuscia University in Viterbo. This talk seeks to ignite a reflection on a radically local scale. I'm not talking about the right to the city, but the right to a small town, Orte, a hill town on the Tiber River located 70 kilometers upstream from Rome and a very green part of Italy. In late May 2021, the New York Times suggested that people are yearning for alternatives to big cities. Cultural landscapes, like Orte's, are beckoning us towards smaller urban realities and their natural settings. This project aims to bolster the dignity of a place which has experienced centuries of brain drain, but today, especially as we imagine a world post-COVID, Italian hill towns reveal their forgotten potential as spaces designed for and by communities. Small towns have a right to narrate their own stories beyond the shadows of major cities and hegemonal relationships like those instaured by the Papal State. Changing narratives involves time and a number of stakeholders. Some years ago, local officials agreed to restore the 18th century palazzo, Palazzo Nuzzi, together with Tuscia University's Restoration and Conservation Laboratories. This sort of interdisciplinary relationship has been ongoing for a quarter of a century. It has seen university scholars and local experts from the Museum of Sacred Art, the archaeological collection, the civic and diocesan archives, together with local associations, work under the auspices of Orte's municipality. At first glance, this cittadina may look similar to much of the capital's hinterland. For many commuters and travelers, Orte is synonymous with its train station and highway exit. For artsy types, on the other hand, this town has become a topos for its idyllic but threatened equilibrium between town and country, thanks to documentaries by the controversial filmmaker Pierpaolo Pasolini, The Walls of Sana from 1971 and The Form of the City in 1974. In collaboration with RAI, the national television network, the filmmaker took artistic action to call attention to a small town, spurring us to reevaluate traditional architecture, agrarian landscapes, and local heritage. Pierpaolo Pasolini, born in Bologna in 1922, murdered in Rome in 1975, was one of Italy's most famous multimedia artists, poet, filmmaker, novelist, journalist, visual artist, editor, and activist. To most Anglophones, Pasolini is best known as the rebellious and audacious director of the 1964 Gospel According to Matthew, Teorema 68, Arabian Nights 74, not to mention his posthumous Salò, or the 120 Days of Sodom, 1976. From 1950 through the mid-1960s, Pasolini found asylum and inspiration in Rome, especially in its disenfranchised neighborhoods and local communities. In the last 10 years of his life, however, his attitude towards the capital conveyed alienation and disenchantment. Land speculation had distorted and gentrified its picturesque neighborhoods and communities. At the apex of his career, Pasolini retreated to the countryside near Orte, where he worked in a refurbished medieval castle, which became his refuge. 50 years after its creation, Pasolini's documentary, The Form of the City, provides punctual, multimedia reflections on the critical state of cities, traditional lifestyles, and land development. Today, many small urban centers in Italy are unable to maintain their historical centers, aging museums, and visitor systems. In partnership with Tuscia University, Orte is exploring strategies to unite its archaeological and diocesan collections into a new city museum, which will include topics in contemporary history and development and ways of exploring its minor and major heritage. Rising to the challenge, Orte's burgeoning cultural hub aspires to include local townspeople in the enhancement, promotion, and conservation of its natural and cultural resources. The town's museum collections have grown obsolete and struggle to stay open. My aim for this project is to review cultural heritage and move beyond clerical commissions and academic divisions to re-examine local identity while engaging locals in the co-creation of a museum mission. In an effort to dialogue with canonical historical narratives, Orte's future city museum can, as Pasolini suggests, recount the story of thousands of nameless people who formed and continue to form this town. Thank you. It's been an honor to participate in Krakow's CAMOC conference this year.
The city of Milan has a very complex and articulated museum system. The municipality directly manages a network of nearly 20 civic museums with collections with different themes. The city is changing rapidly and the museum system wants to keep up with Milan's international objectives. In 2019, the Culture Department launched a research on the international application of the concept of museum district for a possible improvement of the public offer of the museum, which ended with the drafting of a strategic plan in October 2020. A museum district is an organizational model in which different subjects participate capable of improving the exhibition offer in a particular territorial area. The Civic Institute are led by 4 different departments divided by thematic areas. This type of organization does not take into account the distribution of museums in the city on a territorial level and the possible interaction between the various cultural chains. Thinking from a territorial organization point of view, we can identify 4 districts: The first is located around the Sempione Park, which sees in the immediate vicinity civic-owned entities, the Castello Sforzesco, the Civic Archaeological Museum, the Civic Aquarium and other institutions such as the Triennale Foundation, Palazzo Litta, historical monuments, the Arco della Pace and the Civic Arena, as well as other places of entertainment and culture, the Strehler Theatre and the Dal Teatro Verme, Leonardo da Vinci Last Supper. The second district, the area of Giardini Pubblici, is a real museum garden. Here there are the pavilion of contemporary art and the gallery of modern art, by a side to which are added the Natural History Museum and the Planetarium on the second side, who belonging to the civic museums. Palazzo Dugnani follows along the third sides, while on the fourth there is the Hotel Diurno, subject to an upcoming restoration in a space recently dedicated to the birth of Mead, the first center for digital culture. A new private museum of Etruscan civilization will open along Corso Venezia. Not far from the gardens, there is also another civic museum, the Boschi di Stefano House Museum. The cultural offer is enriched by other institutes, to the Nhb Conservatory, to the State Archives, just to mention the main ones. The third district is around Piazza del Duomo. The Civic Institute at the Palazzo Reale, a historical space for temporary exhibition, and the Museum del Novecento. In the immediate vicinity there are also the Museum of the Risorgimento and the Museum of Costume, Fashion and Design. In its immediate surroundings, there are several cultural institutes, the Brera Art Gallery, the Podi Pezzoli Museum, the Baghetti Valsecchi Museum, the Galleria d'Italia, the Ambrosiana Art Gallery. A fourth district is the ancient industrial area of Ansaldo. Here, in 2014, the museum was born, the Museum of Cultures. The preliminary analysis was followed by the final drafting of strategic plan, which indicated the strategic and operational guidelines for the redesign of the city museum offer. The strategic plan consists on the three sections. First section, analysis, concerns the analysis of the evidence emerging from the activities of the civic museum involved, from the recognition of the territorial context, from listening to external stakeholders and from the international benchmark. Second section, planning. The document sets out the result of the design phase, identifying the strategic axis, objectives and action for the implementation of the plan. Third section, monitoring. The methodology for monitoring and evaluating the reorganization process is presented in the last section of strategic plan. The District X project is a participatory project and is part of the reorganization of the Milanese museum system, responding to the needs of contemporary society through the rethinking of the role of museums. Museums have a duty to engage communities and individuals in order to understand their needs. The first edition was held in 2020 through the action Distretto X, Sguardi Plurali sui Musei. The goal of Distretto X projects was to involve the LGBTQI+ community for the identity creation of the Giardini Pubblici Cultural District. Several meetings and workshops took place in the neighborhood museums. They have allowed the strengthening and of co-design through narrative activities and have engaged the values of the Milanese Civic Museum as a creative engine. More than 20 local LGBTQI+ associations have joined the project, and all contributions have been collected in a catalogue. The second edition takes place through the action Distretto X Domani Ti Scrivo. This project investigates the creative and narrative aspects of letters. Through the letters, we want to establish a relationship between two people of different generations, thanks to the reflection on the works of art from the collection of the neighborhood museums. Museums and collection will be the inspiring engine of the intergenerational knowledge.
Welcome to Porto, my adopted city and my home for the past 7 years. Porto is an ancient but also vibrant contemporary city where historical and new urban layers intertwine. In its central zone, which as a whole is a World Heritage Site, one can time travel between the medieval and the present-day city. It's exactly this dynamic coexistence of successive contemporaneities that makes Porto a very interesting subject for a researcher about cities. Let's see just a few examples directly related to the right to the city. Porto is a shrinking city, Since the 1980s, its population dropped from 330 to 220,000 estimated today. With the results of the census later this year, we will know if the trend has continued. Another thing, gentrification has a long history here, dating back to the arrival of foreign port wine trading families who replaced fishermen in Foz, the Douro River mouth. Further, many facets of migrations are reflected in the urban tissue, from hundreds of ilhas, slums which emerged during the Industrial Revolution and where people still live nowadays, to exotic villas built to prove the success of Portuguese returnees from Brazil. An extremely interesting history of activism ranges from the reaction to the poor housing conditions that started right after the Portuguese Revolution in 1974 to more contemporary issues of mass tourism pressure, growing at a rate of 1 million visitors per year from mid-2000s until the pandemic. All this is subject of thorough academic research, artistic and activist engagement. However, a specific perspective that the City Museum could provide is lacking. Let's have a quick look. 2 years ago, the municipal authorities had founded the City Museum, imagined very curiously and ambitiously as a museum at the scale of the entire city. It is composed of 17 stations, out of which some are existing museums, others are currently empty and need adapting, and others are yet to be built, like the renovation and expansion of the old slaughterhouse of Wildt. This particular project promises to transform the entire Campanhã district. This unique moment when a new city museum is contemplated in Porto is the setting for the learning process in heritage and design, the short course I've been teaching at the Polytechnic Institute of Porto. For the 2021 edition, the students were asked to propose themes to be explored. This is a component of heritage, and to design experiences for the Museum of Porto for and with different audiences, a guided tour, an on-site activity in the museum, and an online experience as it showed necessary at this time of pandemic. Based on my own research with Porto as the case study, I proposed 2 key concepts to guide the creative process: sense of place rather than just heritage, and people-centered approach, to avoid thinking about heritage in itself as something disconnected from the people who give it value and significance, and to broaden the time frame beyond looking into the past and history. Several factors about the Porto City Museum came under critical consideration. The museum has not publicly announced its mission statement, collection strategies, or timetable to become fully operational. So each student proposed a mission statement as a part of their work. The students got enthusiastic about the creative tasks, and some of the results far exceeded usual expectations from a student paper. Creative part of the work was, of course, built on insights and analysis of how different city museums operate. The students were inspired by many of the projects and topics discussed here at CAMOC conferences in recent years. We touched the elusive and sensitive nature of intangible heritage, issues of mass tourism, inclusivity, post-memory, sustainability, possible urban futures. In a few years, when the Museum of Porto is fully operational, these young people, now students, will become professionals, and some of them are expected to work or collaborate precisely with the City Museum. Hopefully, with broadened vision of the museum's social role and potential, and well acquainted with current City Museum themes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hiromi Takao. I work at Tamarukto Science Center in Tokyo. First, I'll introduce our museum. Tamarukto Science Center is located in Tokyo. Our museum is established by 5 cities, and this was opened in March 1994. Last year, due to the influence of COVID-19, we are temporarily closed for about 3 months. and we have limited the number of visitors and have suspended some exhibitions since the time of reopening. We have 2 missions. Based on these missions, we are working on social issues with the cooperation of the local community. Today, I will talk about the program for urban disaster prevention in 2019. It is no exaggeration to that severe earthquakes and floods occur every year in Japan. Then, can we see museums contribute to raising citizens' awareness of disaster prevention and saving lives? It is said that if you can survive for 72 hours after a disaster occurs, you can save your life. Therefore, we planned hands-on programs to learn about disaster prevention. The purpose of this program is to help the skills of participants to survive for 72 hours in the event of the disaster. And many adults help this program because it is important to collaborate with a stranger in case of an emergency. The summer program was to learn techniques for surviving in nature. In the program, they set up a tent at the base, learned how to make fire, and made their own chopsticks. After autumn, it consisted of a program to learn about disasters in the city. This is a program for the lower grade in autumn. A total of 129 people participated in a 72-hour survival improvement tour at the Disaster Prevention Experience Learning Facility in Tokyo. In the upper grade program, 38 people spent 2 days for more practical learning. They learned about the program of 5 themes that they may face in the event of a disaster, their attitude to survive, and the necessary skills. On the first day, they learned about various troubles that occur around them after a severe earthquake by playing card games. And they went to the gymnasium of the nearest junior high school to study about the actual shelter. On the second day, they discussed about what they could do for people in need of assistance through their experience at the shelter. And they prepared for the presentation. The last is a presentation of what they learned through the program. We invited the participants' families to share their learning. They also explained disaster prevention skills to visitors. The participants who were initially shy have gradually become more active. 1,040 visitors visited the venue in 2 days. Conclusions. Good point. A new network was built with local governments and civic activists by providing an opportunity for mutual learning. And participants had an opportunity to discuss disaster prevention with their families and prepare for it. Lastly, the presentation of the participants touched the heart of many citizens about the importance of disaster prevention. Issue and future. It is necessary to respond to new crises such as COVID-19. We need to keep learning and working with the community and our citizens. My presentation is that's all. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. We would like to thank all the 7 presenters. And now we have questions.
The first question to Mr. Kamil Stasiak from Joanna Monteiro. A very interesting and inspiring talk. I wonder whether the workshop, The City of My Dreams, could be further developed into an exhibition or maybe into some other similar programs.
Thank you for your question. City of My Dream is one of the variant of a workshop about location of Krakow in the Magdeburg law prepared for a child day. For now, we don't have plan to develop it to the exhibition, but in our workshop and in a new permanent exhibition here in Krzysztofory Palace, we will be discuss about the relation of quality of materials and quality of architecture and its perspective for a long life, and about the city environment and the reuse of waste.
Thank you. A very short and succinct answer. We have a question from Jelena Savic to Yvonne. I know you have been doing a lot of field work for the purposes of this project. Could you please tell us which city museums you have found the most inspiring in this context? Also, could you please elucidate a bit on the next steps for your project?
Thank you, Jelena. Again, thank you for welcoming me to this conference. This research is very much in progress, and it's been highly influenced by the pandemic. So I'd say that the first museum that I reached out to was the City of London Museum at Docklands, because it's a refurbished river port. And so I was interested in seeing how a formerly industrialized area whose identity has changed over time and that really functions as a community meeting space. So for the first few months, I had the privilege to simply be a visitor in a number of museums, and then I began archive work. But my research then became more conceptual as we were behind the screens. So I'd like to say that CAMOC's conference in October there was one moment when Joan Albert said something extremely important, which I opened yesterday's session about, is how do we really create museums about citizenship, museums for citizens rather than city museums, in which we simply transpose our usual preconception about museums full of objects and turn the city into an object. How do we tell our stories? I also need to say that I've been really true to my disappointment with museums. So I'm a museum visitor, I'm a museum lover, I'm a former high school teacher. So I really try to listen to what doesn't work, and I try to map out dysfunctions. So of course I won't mention museums that I think have obsolete strategies, but I would like to cite a specific cooperative in Milan. Their name is Abicita, and they work on inclusiveness, but in an extremely ecumenical way. And so their work on interculture and accessibility as something that involves everyone's experience. That's not limited to race, ethnicity, religious identity, and so on. But how do we really speak to audiences with diverse, to our individual experiences and our different learning styles? Finally, I'd like to say that yesterday's talk about the Wola District Museum was very interesting to me, because working on a small town, I'm working on a place that has never been a victor. It's lost all battles, it's lost all wars, and so its history has been told by the victors. So how do I talk about a place that continues to have a minor role and continues to not be considered with any kind of dignity? And so I am exploring the roles of museums that have a very clear relationship between periphery and center. And I'd also like to add that I work in a very conservative place. I cooperate with a religious authority. I work with the dioceses. And I don't have the privilege of working with colleagues that I'm recognizing in this context. I'm really working against the grain, in which local governments and even citizens want to have a heroic tale, which my research is showing they simply do not. And so I'd say the next steps are very long-term, and I hope to be able to continue working with this community for the next decades. Thank you, Elena.
Thank you very much, Yvonne.
Thank you for this exhaustive answer. And now we have a question from Yvonne to Jelena Savic. Your approach to students as citizens and future museum professionals is very interesting. Could you give us some specific examples of exercises with students that grappled with their two-pronged role?
Thank you very much, Yvonne, for this question. I can point out two sets of examples. The students have realized that it's important to engage people and to have them learn by doing. So one of the examples I showed were the textures of different facades and different facade elements. It was a project by one of the students whose idea was just to grab a piece of paper and a charcoal and then do a walk along a historical street and capture in that way the interesting textures of the buildings along that historical street. And then at the end of the tour, all the textures are analyzed and the historical context and artistic context is given. Or for example, another one is turning a passive display into something active. And one of the proposals was at the Bank of Materials, for the Bank of Materials, where the glazed tiles of Porto, very remarkable symbol of Porto and its architecture, are exhibited. So the people would not only look at the tiles from different historical periods, but also learn how the tiles are made, how the tiles are painted by going through the process in a glazing tiles workshop. And the most interesting and most captivating one is always about gastronomy, because food and the social gatherings around food, around preparation and sharing food are so important for the Portuguese. For them, it's the everyday life, it's a part of themselves and their tradition. But for us who come from different cultural contexts, it is very, very striking difference in comparison to other nations and to other regions. So one of the most remarkable exercises is when students present the gastronomical tradition of their own region by bringing in the food to share and explaining how it's made. So I hope I responded partly. Of course, there is so much more to bring in, and I will be happy to expand on this at the next conferences or in our informal contacts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jelena. And now we have two questions to Hiromi, our last speaker. So the first question to Hiromi Takao is from Junichi, and it goes, could you explain more why your museum decided to get involved in urban disaster prevention?
And first of all, I would like to thank you everyone who visited our museum in 2019. In my opinion, disaster prevention programs should be adopted at all city museums that may be affected by the disaster. This is because it not only raises the awareness of participants, but also encourages local residents who are not usually aware of disaster prevention to confirm the necessity and preparation for disaster prevention. And it is not the call from the government, such as the national government, but the call from the scale of the city where we live, so we can get the sympathy of many people. However, we are not disaster prevention specialists. Still, it can be a hub that connects those activities with many locals. We will continue to be aware of social issues and aim to become a local hub that can develop activities in collaboration with the local community. I hope it is Jenny's answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And the second question to Hiromi is from Monica Diamanti. Do you have any feedback from the participants? Did you do some kind of evaluation of the programs?
Okay. Thank you. Your question. And unfortunately, there is no feedback from the participants. However, we received comment from the participants' parents about their child's growth. I would like to evaluate it in the future. Sorry, not a good answer. Sorry. That's all.
Thank you very much. This has been the last questions that we have. Therefore, before the poster session, we have a moment to grab a drink or two and just rest your eyes from the screen. Let's reconvene at 1:15, that is in about 10 minutes. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome after the break, and we will now present to you 5 very special, 5 very different posters, make some suggestions and leave you some time perhaps to consider them yourselves.
Is it at all possible to organize a poster session when you cannot walk along the posters, when participants cannot approach them and examine?
For example, because the posters are here in Krakow and some participants, as we have heard, may be in Australia.
Let us therefore exploit modern technology and harness it so that it can assist us.
We suggest that the chat function in your Zoom becomes an open Hyde Park for sharing your thoughts and exchanging comments on the individual posters.
This is perhaps as interactive as we can go without drawing you or bringing you or importing in any other way to Krakow.
My name is Vera Pasqualin, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. I thank CAMOC board and especially Joanna and Elena and the Krakow Museum for the great challenging organization of this conference. And I also thank Marisa and Olga for the partnership to build this poster, which is available for you, as you can see, and also our contacts for future contacts. Well, we are bringing here the comparison of the use of flags on the Cibeles Palace in Madrid during the LGBT Pride Party in 2018 and 2019, and how the facade of the building indicates ideology and influences the city identity. I'm not sure if you know Madrid, but I can tell you that Cibeles Palace is a landmark of the Spanish capital and is part of the Art Walk, which includes the important museums such as Prado, Reina Sofia, and Thyssen. This centenary building now is the headquarters of the Madrid City Hall, and also houses the Centro, that is the municipal cultural institution dedicated to the contemporary art. Well, the palace is one of the main points of the Pride Party's route, and in 2019, the new administration took place and changed the symbols of the facade, replacing the Pride Party to the Spanish flag. Well, the use of the governmental institutions such as museums are historically exploited as symbol of power. The Cibeles Palace facade is very iconic, specifically during the Madrid Pride Party. The symbolism of the flag marks the ideological position, and in the case of 2019, distanced the local government from the purpose advocated by the LGBT community. City brands are built over the long term, and Madrid has consolidated its image as tolerant, open, and welcoming city. Perhaps in the future, this image will change, given the subliminal messages messages of the use of symbols scattered around the city by different ideologies in power. For now, nationalism prevails over the LGBT agenda, at least considering the use of symbols in this particular building. But, inspired of the previous presentations, I'd like to propose a new question, instead of trying to provide answers. So, how can the city museums engage in communities when they're often connected to the local government ideology? how the museums can be independent and to be able not to be neutral in a long term when the city administration changes from one party to another, and it could jeopardize their work in the context of this polarized society. Museums are part of the municipal strategy for the construction of image. Long-term continuation of museums' actions and engagement with society may be key for successful participation in this process. But is it possible to protect the museum's action from the political influences of the local government? Well, that's all that I have for you, and I'd like to continue discussing this amazing subject with you all. Thank you for the opportunity.
A message from Argentina about a singular city of La Plata and about how urban planning is a common good, something that is most important for the people, because as much as a city is a product of human societies, those societies are actually people, and the city causes the same problems and conflicts as anything else. There is the struggle between economic issues, right to property, and preservation of historical heritage, as well as the environmental impact and the impact of the outside environment. Urban planning comes on top of all that. There was a group of neighbors, they came from all over the political spectrum, who began to meet after a historical house had been demolished. This demolition made them close up the ranks and stand up against the new smooth walls. In this way, this self-convened group of neighbors set up Defend the City of La Plata group. Now they participate in different actions and they come to speak whenever something needs being controlled by the people. This is a particular grassroots movement that is very sensitive to the process of identity and recognition of the heritage and memory of the heritage of the city of La Plata. This is certainly something where citizens exercise their right to a better quality of life. And this is something that is very, very close to the subject of our conference. And now we have moved to Anita Pudat's presentation from Iran. This is a poster on correlations between local people, museums, and historic contexts, and their mutual responsibilities. We have now moved to a very different part of the world, and there is the Persian Gulf Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology of Bandar Abbas. This museum is the place where the lovers of museums have created Shuran, an association that for 10 years, nearly 10 years, helped to gather cultural heritage. It works in the Hormozgan province, and there it not only creates the Children's Center and Institute, but also workshops for children, sessions which are also for specialists, so not only for the people who come from the street, but for them too. They also advertise the whole thing by organizing traditional rituals and celebrations, such as of the shortest day in the year, very popular in Iran, and also the Scarlet Wednesday. Doing that, they bring cultural dynamism together with protection of cultural heritage, instilling all those values drawn from that into the society so as to help the survival of local museums. And in this way, they help the society to become sustainable.
By Olga Ogurtsova, The Problem of Tourism in the Context of the Caucasia National Museum. Now, for over a decade, different ministries and departments have been discussing ways of boosting tourism in the region. According to the authorities, making Caucasia attractive for domestic and international tourists will have not only a positive impact on the recognition of the Republic of Caucasia globally, but will also significantly boost its economy. The establishment of the National Museum has become a significant step forward. It's become the key element of tourist infrastructure and a new brand of the Republic of Caucasia and the city of Abakan. The Caucasus National Museum is key to cultural life of the region. The museum collection includes thousands of artifacts found in the area. Some of them date back to the Bronze Age. And the main objects of interest of the museum and the national heritage of the Caucasus culture are the standing stones or menhirs. The space became not only a museum, but also a cultural site for many events of the city and the region. For example, the national celebration of Caucasus Chilpazi, the Day of the Sun. It also became the main venue for the Night of the Museum, and last year, during the Inclusion Day, it brought together as many as 1,500 participants.
This is a poster session by Patrycja Schettino, who speaks of representing the diversity of the city. Her example is Wolfsburg. It is a very interesting project on a documentary film made in 2007 in a German city, very well known for its Volkswagen car factory that attracts many Gastarbeiters, that is, workers from other cities and countries. The documentary was made by a team of European youth. They were teamed with a director who came from South Africa. As it was about cultural diversity and the city, it was already diverse in the nationalities of the team who created it. Not all of them were experts in making films. They decided to focus on food and architecture. They realized that the first buildings outside Finland that Finnish architect Alvar Aalto built here were just precisely in Wolfsburg. Library, churches. Now, all the interviews were done by another, we would say, visiting teacher. Probably the locals would call him a Gastarbeiter, because he was a Polish PhD student of law. He worked in English and in German. The final documentary was shown on the local OK TV, and the process of creating it included different communities and volunteers. The people who were the key crew for the documentary shared the house and the budget for cooking their food every day. So the video not only documents an intercultural learning process, but is also a part of it. Well, these were the posters. The question is, do we have questions to the posters? Very interesting material presented in a very interesting graphic manner, slides, and a lot of text included. Was it something that was self-explanatory, or can we still expect that there are some questions unanswered? Of course, there are many of them, but is there something really burning at the moment? We understand that the process of typing things in chat and then passing them to our mobiles may take a moment, so please be patient. We will, in a moment, probably receive some questions that might have been asked a minute ago. In the meantime, we will have one more session, and after that session there will be questions to the people who make their presentations during it, and then there will come the final closing session, and a very special invitation.
Ladies and gentlemen, since we have no questions to this poster session, we will reconvene 1:45 for our final session.
Which means a 10-minute break before the final session.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, the poster session brought us some questions, and the first question is from Jelena Savic to Patrycja. Knowing that the documentary is about representing the diversity of the city and that it's entered several film festivals and was also supported by the mayor of Wolfsburg, I was wondering if it also raised interest or possible connections with its city museum, Staatsmuseum Wolfsburg.
Thank you very much for this question, Helena. Actually, we spent some time in the city doing research about the history of the city before to decide which topic to focus on, food and on architecture. So we went to the museum as a team in order to learn more about the history of the city. So this was the connection, in the sense that we went there in order to learn more about the place and to choose about what to focus our documentary that we made in 2 weeks. So we had a very short time to learn about the city, also to learn about each other and how to become really a team, and to be able to produce this documentary in 2 weeks.
Thank you very much. And the following question also from Jelena Savic, this time to the Bandar Abbas Museum. It is about the museum subject. Is there a special room, perhaps, or an exhibition in your museum about the past, present, and future of Bandar Abbas, together with your Persian Gulf Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology? Which other museums would you advise to visit? Which of them tell the story of your city?
Hello, dear colleagues and all attendees. At first, please let me to thank you to give me this opportunity to attend you here and learn from you. It's my honor. This gap gave me this opportunity to write my answers. Now I can read my written answers for you. No, there is no specific room to show just Bandar Abbas in past and present, as I have presented, and colleagues present in this conference may have noticed. My museum is not a city museum, as you mentioned. It's the regional museum of archaeology and anthropology, which cover the cultural aspects of southeast of Iran. Because of the shortage of cultural spaces and the lack of a city museum, unfortunately, my museum acts as a city museum too, by performing temporary exhibitions or fulfilling local traditional conventions, as well as national ceremonies. We have some galleries which show some past and present cultural aspects that is not monopolistically assigned to the city, but is compatible with some other cities of our province too. And the second part of your question, I can recommend every visitor and tourist to visit the museum and the archives of documents under authority the mayor. My colleagues in this museum have been engaged in collecting and exposing the old documents related to the province. They could assign a specific room to the city easier and faster than we could, as it's the mayor that it is the mayor that is in charge of managing a city, past and present, so they can tell some different stories of contemporary Bandar Abbas.
We now have a question from Yvonne Mazurek to Patrycja again. How was the film developed? So that's the first question. And the second question, where did the idea come from and how did the team convene to make the documentary?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Actually, we choose, every one of us, we choose to participate as a volunteer in a kind of summer camp. And so some of us, we had knowledge about how to use a camera or how to produce a documentary. And other participants, they just joined because they wanted to spend 2 weeks in Wolfsburg and to learn about how to use the camera and to do a documentary together. This was very challenging because, of course, it was a voluntary work. So also some of us we had different kind of motivation and different kind of skills, but we managed to, as I said in the poster, to really become very focused, and to everyone was able to give a contribution. Was also very important, this part. So during the 2 weeks, some of us, we had the task to cook for the others. So also a way to learn from each other how to cook dishes from different countries. That is this TV in Wolfsburg. So they give us all the tools, the software, the cameras, very high quality cameras. And at the end of the 2 weeks, the documentary was broadcasted by this TV. And their approach was very interesting because they tried to be a kind of participatory TV. So also, I mean, every citizen from Wolfsburg could ask to contribute and to realize a documentary for this TV.
Thank you very much for all your questions and even more for all the exhaustive answers. Ladies and gentlemen, this is sadly the last of the sessions we have in store for you for this 3-day conference.
And like the previous ones, it has been scheduled for 3 no more than 15-minute presentations.
And the last quarter of the hour will be devoted to our Q&A session.
Let us first invite Alvin Tantse from Singapore to discuss Singapore's Street Corner Museum scheme.
Alvin Tantse.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and greetings from Singapore, where it's actually close to our dinner time. My name is Alvin, and I'm from the National Heritage Board, which oversees and runs 9 museums here in Singapore. So let me begin by first thanking ICOM, CAMOC, and the Museum of Krakow for organizing this conference. Today, I'll be talking about Singapore's Street Corner Heritage Gallery scheme, and I hope that my presentation will be useful to our conference participants. So the Street Corner Heritage Gallery scheme, it is actually very much influenced by the concept of the eco-museum, whereby the museum itself is actually focused on the identity of a place, and it involves the participation of local communities with the aim of enhancing the livelihoods of these communities. We were particularly taken by the concept of the eco-museum because, as shown in this slide, it is defined as an instrument that is conceived, fashioned, and operated jointly by both the public and the people sectors. and also because it positions museums and local communities as partners, with both partners being committed to and united through common goals, contributing to these common goals in the form of a participatory community compact. And I think this concept really echoes what Sui said in her keynote address yesterday about the importance of partnerships and how city museums place a special emphasis on the relations between a place and its people, how it actually connects a place to its people, perhaps to the wider society and even to the world. So in the case of Singapore's Street Corner Heritage Gallery scheme, we decided to focus our attention on Singapore's historical precincts, which are associated with specific ethnic communities and which house a high concentration of traditional trades and businesses. And by that, we mean traditional trades and businesses which have been operating in the precinct for at least 30 years. So equally important, we selected these historical precincts because the National Heritage Board has a physical presence in each of these precincts. And this is important because they serve as our anchor institutions. So our museums, our heritage institutions and heritage galleries in these precincts, they often already serve as the placemaker for their respective precincts. And under the scheme, they will also now have to act as mentors for our new street corner heritage galleries, and they will also act as the coordinator for the programs that are offered by our street corner heritage galleries. And I think all these factors are working together. They're necessary to provide what I think the speaker from the Museum of London calls authentic lived experiences. So they are actual practicing, traditional trades and businesses that are still in operation within this precinct, and they help to contribute to the unique identity of each of these precincts. And therefore, through our approach, these historical precincts where our institutions and museums are based, they become our sandboxes for prototyping. So they were actually sandboxes where we could actually start small. We could introduce a small number of street corner heritage galleries, learn from these pilot programs, and then subsequently enable us to scale up and roll out to more precincts across Singapore. So having shared the approach for our street corner heritage galleries, let me now quickly share the 4 strategic objectives of the scheme, which are as listed in this slide. So first, this scheme seeks to actually activate public spaces within historical precincts by creating street corner heritage galleries that showcase the history, the heritage of the traditional businesses and trades that operate within these precincts. Second, we actually hope to work with qualifying traditional trades and businesses or stakeholders to co-curate all these heritage showcases, because we wanted to actually instill a sense of ownership, a sense of pride in the stakeholders that are part of the scheme. And in doing so, it brings us to our third strategic objective, is when we work together with these stakeholders, we hope to equip them with the necessary competencies in areas such as conducting research, conducting basic curation, and presentation and so on. And we also provide them with the seed funding for programming and for these display cases. And so finally, in the long run, we actually hope to create a network of street corner heritage galleries in different parts of Singapore, or in the words of the speaker from Spain yesterday, we hope to actually create meaningful heritage places which are shared within the neighborhood. So the strategic objectives of our Street Corner Heritage Gallery scheme, they directly support 3 of the 4 strategic pillars of our SG Heritage Plan. So this is actually Singapore's first 5-year master plan for the heritage and museum sector. It's available online for download. And the Street Corner Heritage Gallery scheme contributes to the strategic pillars of our places, our cultures, and our communities, as well as the specific areas that are listed in this slide. So these areas would include our commitment to support more ground-up initiatives, to collaborate with more community partners, and in doing so, to enliven our historic precincts. And I mean, these areas that I've just shared, they're not exactly new. And they were in fact mentioned by the speaker from Poland who said, and I quote, all types of museums should be encouraged to take actions in their neighborhoods, especially when it comes to built heritage and intangible cultural heritage, or ICH for short. So let me now move on to talk a bit about the roles and responsibilities of NHB, as well as our stakeholders, the traditional trades and businesses that are covered under the scheme. So under the scheme, NHB has actually 4 key roles. First, we will conduct research to identify qualifying trades and businesses. We will also conduct research by carrying out face-to-face interviews with these trades and businesses on the history and the heritage of their shops, their trades, their crafts, and so on. We also need to work very closely with these stakeholders to actually co-curate the mini museums that their shops will be hosting on their premises. Second, we need to provide one-off funding for the fabrication, the design of these mini museum showcases, and as well as recurrent annual funding support. So the recurrent annual programming support is for these stakeholders to develop heritage-related programs that they can then offer to visitors to the precinct. On our part, we will also provide the national platforms such as our Singapore Heritage Festival, or the precinct level platforms such as the various cultural festivals, museum open houses, so that the stakeholders and their programs could be actually incorporated into the programming calendar of our institutions and our festivals, and we can help promote them to the wider public. And as I mentioned before, we provide the necessary training for our stakeholders in areas such as basic curation, public speaking, program delivery, and so on. So on the part of our stakeholders, what they need to do is that they must agree to work with us to allow us to actually document the history and the heritage of their shops, their trades and products, and to also allow us to share the research on our website, which is roots.sg. They must also play a very active role to co-curate these mini museum showcases. And they also, and that involves sharing their stories, helping us pick up the objects to be displayed, which are representative of the heritage and the history of their shops or their, their trades. They must also commit to actually develop annual programming for visitors and to participate in our national level or precinct level festivals or open houses. And these programs generally include things like having talks or guided tours, which were similar, I think, to the story walks in the precinct, which was shared by Nico, the speaker from the Netherlands. But I think what's also important to remember is that we don't want the project to just involve the community. What we really want to do is for the project to be community-led and community-owned so that it becomes more sustainable in the long term. So we started working on our street corner heritage galleries in 2019, and we launched our first batch of 5 street corner heritage galleries last year within the Balestier precinct. So this slide provides more information about our first batch of 5 street corner heritage galleries. Just 2 months ago this year, we launched our second batch of 7 street corner heritage galleries in the historic precinct of Kampung Glam, an ethnic Malay enclave. And again, this slide provides more information about our second batch of street corner heritage galleries. And I think it's worth highlighting that the past 2 launches of our street corner heritage galleries have actually attracted considerable public interest as well as media coverage. And this has resulted in extensive free nationwide marketing for the traditional trades and businesses who participated in our scheme and actually made them very happy. So we got very good feedback from our stakeholders. And having launched 2 editions of our Street Corner Heritage Gallery scheme, we think that it's very important for us to seek feedback from the traditional trades and businesses so that we can improve upon the scheme. So consequently, every 2 to 3 months after the launch of each batch of our Street Corner Heritage Galleries, we conduct a survey to actually seek feedback on the effectiveness of the schemes. And the survey findings for the second batch of Street Corner Heritage Galleries are as shown in this slide. I think we're quite happy to note that, like 100% agreed that the scheme has actually helped to raise public awareness about their business and shop. But I think it's even more heartening to note that 100% of them felt that their participation has increased their own awareness and appreciation of the heritage of their business, of their shops. And this is especially so for the younger generation of shop owners who were not aware of the rich history of their shops or their business. And it's also very heartening that we got feedback that all of them would recommend the scheme to other qualifying businesses and shops in the precinct. But besides seeking feedback from our partners, we have also set for ourselves a number of key performance indicators to measure, how successful is our scheme. So in terms of KPIs, we actually hope to roll out 25 street corner heritage galleries by the end of 2022. We are quite on track to meet this target because we have already launched 12 galleries. We also set ourselves the target of 50 programs by 2022. We don't think there's any way we could meet this target because of COVID-19, which resulted in cancellation, postponement of a lot of our programs involving our street corner heritage galleries. In addition, we also have additional indicators which seek to measure public feedback about our galleries, and these would be participants in the programs offered by our street corner heritage galleries. But again, unfortunately, due to COVID, we were unable to administer the survey and get feedback. So these are some of the things that we hope to restart once once programs involving the street corner heritage galleries could be resumed. Now, having shared the KPIs for the scheme, I thought it would also be useful to share some of the challenges that we faced. I think one of the key challenges was that when we first approached qualifying traditional trades and businesses, we encountered difficulties in explaining the scheme to them and convincing them to come on board. So for our first batch, for instance, we approached 8 traditional trades and businesses. We were turned down by 3. For the second batch, we approached 12. We were turned down by 5. But hopefully, this challenge would somehow be resolved as more street corner heritage galleries come on board, and we have more galleries to serve as success stories and to also act as advocates for the scheme. But on the flip side, because the scheme was relatively successful and attracted extensive media coverage, we were actually approached by other interested traditional trades and businesses that were not under the 5 historic precincts that we were going to cover. And so unfortunately, due to limited resources, we had to turn them down and tell them when we review the scheme at the end of 2022 and we restart the scheme, we will consider their request. The rest of the challenges were really COVID related, which I talked about or alluded to in my earlier slides. But I just wanted to add that even with COVID-19 impacting our programs, there were also opportunities offered by COVID. So for instance, due to travel restrictions, all Singaporeans, like many citizens in other countries, we were forced to stay in Singapore, and we were then encouraged as a national campaign to encourage Singaporeans to rediscover Singapore, to go out and explore the historic precincts. So this has actually resulted in increased footfall and even increased business for some of our street corner heritage galleries, especially the food and beverages stores, as shown in the screen captures in this slide. So in terms of upcoming plans for the scheme, we target to roll out to 3 more historic precincts, and these historic precincts include Little India this year, and 2 more precincts like Geylang Serai and Chinatown next year. And again, to reinforce my earlier point, these are actually the historic precincts in which we have an anchor institution, and the names of the anchor institutions are seen in the brackets. So at the end of 2022, what we hope to do is we will actually review the effectiveness and the impact of the scheme. We will make the necessary adjustments. We will seek inputs from all the participating traditional trades and businesses, and then we will decide whether we can actually expand the scheme to cover the rest of Singapore in the second iteration of our master plan. So if any of you are interested to find out more about our Street Corner Heritage Gallery scheme, I've included the links to the various digital resources which could be useful to you. And with that, I've actually come to the end of my presentation. Thank you for your time. If you would like a copy of my presentation slides, or if you have queries regarding my presentation which could not be answered in the Q&A session later, you can email me at this address. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alvin. I must say it's a great pity I can't be in Singapore. I was planning my holiday there, but I hope one day I'll be able to see what is there.
And now the second speaker is Anna Trapkova from Russia, who will give us a personal scale view of the city, the Museum of Moscow's program of local studies in Moscow neighborhoods.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Trapkova. I'm director of the Museum of Moscow. And let me tell you today about our recent project, Moscow Without Outskirts. So first of all, a few words about Museum of Moscow, if you don't know. So we are this year will be 125 years old, and so it's difficult in this age keep to be young. As it's true for many other city museums, our mission is to share stories about the past, the present, and the future of the city, as well as reflect changes in both the local environment and citizens' day-to-day lives. We want to provide more than just the big picture of Moscow, which is a quickly developing globalized city. We want to build a personal scaled view of the city. And what does it mean in practice? Moscow urban landscape has been significantly transformed in the last decades by the renovation, redevelopment programs, by the global market migration flows, and development of communication technologies. Following these changes, the city government shifted their course toward decentralization. The current idea is to provide an equal level of development support for all the neighborhoods in Moscow. And so consequently, we must revise our view of the Moscow's history, since its current state is obviously highly centralized. So we've decided that our goal is to tell about the unique identity each district has, irrespective of how close it is to the center of the city. If you have been in Moscow, or like people who arrive in our capital and head from the airport to the historical center, they often feel surprised at how brutal Moscow outskirts look like. And what is the big difference, vast difference between outskirts and the center of Moscow? You can see long lines of high-rise concrete panel residential buildings when you drive along the highway. But in fact, Moscow districts are full of amazing things: park, historical significant areas, and exciting stories that we want to discover and to tell. So we decided to launch a project to highlight the uniqueness of each district in Moscow. And the experience of Moscow one might have varies widely, depending on whether you were born in the city or have arrived recently, whether they live in the center or in the suburbs. So the Museum of Moscow has continuously been working with local identity and tried to shift to work with this difference. For instance, in 2017, we launched the annual series of summer outdoor events, local lectures and guided tours in local yards around the city, with each of them focusing on the history of the district in which it takes place. The lectures proved to be highly popular among the residents, inspiring them to share their own memories of the locality. And now, with the aim of capturing the various perspectives of a single city, locals' memories, the stories of Moscow neighborhoods, and to support the decentralized approach to the city, to the history of the city, the Museum of Moscow is launching an interdisciplinary project called Moscow Without Outskirts. So the idea is quite simple. You see the map of Moscow. Moscow currently has 125 districts and 21 other settlements in so-called New Moscow, the city extension to Moscow region in 2012. So we want to feature East District as a unique entity with its own landscape architecture, residents, and the historic narrative they have been forming. The project's main goal is to study decentralization that slowly blends the ideas of the city center and city outskirts together. Time frame of the project for the moment seems to be quite long and, to be honest, quite unreal, because if we really will organize an exhibition and a program about each district, which take us, let's say, 3-4 months, then this year, this project needs more than 35 years to be realized. It's impossible, of course, but what we want to do during the first 1-2 years of the project, we hope to create a general approach on how to make a research and how to create a narrative on the level of the district. And this is really important, how to involve locals in this work. So Moscow shows the great variety in its districts. Some of the districts have a long, complex history. Some are former villages or urban settlements absorbed into Moscow when it grew. And others were formed around factories or industries. So for the first year, 2021, we choose 2 districts, Taganka and Kapotnia, and you can see that one is in the city center, another is far enough away from it. So the next slide is about structure of the project. First stage is research. Our museum team arrives in the district and reaches out to the local platforms such as cultural centers, libraries, social welfare centers, and galleries. Then we organize focus groups and interviews, meet up with the local public opinion leaders, inviting them for cooperation. The task here is to improve the understanding of the local community and to build a dialogue between the museum and the residents of the districts. We are planning to partner with local artists or artists in residence. For instance, the young artists from the free workshops, the educational program of the Moscow Modern Art Museum are currently conducting an artistic research in Taganka district. Then the second step is museum exhibitions. We use the collected materials, stories, and the museum collection to launch an exhibition in the central building of the Museum of Moscow. It will look like a tourist bureau inviting everyone to visit the district. The exhibition will also continue collecting the stories shared by the local public. Moreover, the space will serve as a place for meetings and discussions with the local activist groups. For instance, Taganka used to be a merchant district where money played a significant role. A few large Moscow treasure troves were unburied here. And surprisingly, the Moscow Coin Collecting Society still gathers in Taganka. We hope they will share their stories in the Museum of Moscow too. And then the third stage is return. One major question that we have been asked at the early stages of the project, and we're still there at the early stage, was, will you bring your findings back to the district? And yes, we will. We hope we will. We will organize tours in the districts, lectures, and different kinds of events. Hopefully, we will be able to collaborate with the local cultural institutes to bring a modified version of the exhibition back to the district it describes. After, of course, the main exhibition will be over in our museum. We still have not streamlined an approach towards building a narrative
about each of the districts. And of course, this approach, this methodology should be really, really flexible. So we know it can be formed, this narrative, using a whole range of aspects, such as text about local history, literature, poetry, images of the districts throughout the years, stories from the locals, and artifacts stored both in museums and local homes. It should also include information about the future project. So how do we feature all of that in a single space? Nobody knows yet. We will see in 1 month when the first exhibition about Taganka district will be open. So welcome to Taganka, or Tagansky district, is one of the oldest district of Moscow. And the first reason why it's very important for us, because we can describe the problem of the center and outskirts on this example. So Taganka became the part of the city in the 16th century and received its name at those time. The local survey engaged in the making of tagans, which is the Russian word for trivets, metal stands used for supporting a hot dish over fire. So in 19th century, Taganka became the industrial suburb of Moscow. And by the 20th century, it has become one of the central Moscow district with very diverse population. Large number of both native residents, people moved to Moscow recently, and regular visitors, and a variety of activities. So this is how it looks, and actually we can name Taganka nowadays intense cultural district. One of the main place of interest is Stalin's skyscraper. Taganka Theater is the theater art studio, one of the most popular Moscow theaters, library for foreign literature, Alexander Solzhenitsyn's House of Russia Abroad, as well as a number of popular bars and restaurants can be found at Taganka. And then the other reason why we opted for Taganka as our first district. Last year, a group of activists and local history experts proposed to Moscow official to open a museum dedicated to Taganka district. They had an aspiration, but neither collection nor a building. So we are trying to propose for them actually a model of the Museum of Taganka, the model that can be criticized, but also can be approved by locals. And with this project, we want to achieve several goals. First, we want to fuse together the experience our curators have in organizing exhibitions with the ideas of local historians who have no such experience. Second, we want to intertwine each district's exhibition into our general concept and methodology for working with the city history. Third, we want to engage locals into creating the exhibitions, not only small local activist groups, but anyone who interested in sharing their stories, photographs, artifacts, or maybe even research. Our project actually is about establishing a connection to local groups and individuals, about a museum reaching out to the city outside its comfort zone. Throughout our work on the project, we've been constantly encountering ethical issues as well. On the one hand, a city's museum main purpose is to study, preserve, and represent the city and its people. Taganka, as well as any other district, is part of our city. But on the other hand, organizing an exhibition in the main city museum is different from doing the same on the local level in a small district museum that holds the meetings of local historians. We are outsiders for the local community, bound to stumble upon a
power relationship, and we'll do our best at avoiding it, but being as inclusive towards the local community as possible. We will study all existing local initiatives and work together, asking for their expertise and knowledge and sharing our experience in organizing exhibitions and public programs. This way, the Museum of Moscow will become a resource center rather than a power center. And probably you would ask me what is in this photo, and I have to answer that this is the fragment of the tea party at Taganka. So sometimes to be a good researcher and curator means to be able to eat 1 month-old dry Easter cake, or kulich in Russian, or panettone if we name it Italian way. Our project also proposed to shift the focus from the official history of Taganka toward the fabric woven using local stories told by its residents. For instance, our narrative about famous churches in Taganka will include the Museum of Moscow's own collection, the other museums' collections, and the research performed by the local historian Yelena Petrovskaya, and the stories of local people, including local priest Father Sergei, as well as stories about the Soviet times shared by the locals. Those times were very special since religious practices were forbidden. So baptism was performed at home, while some churches used to serve as sports facilities, as locals told us in their interviews. Moreover, we collect stories shared by the residents about their homes and the surrounding localities, varying in architecture, fate, and memories they store. As I told, the district has Stalin skyscraper, the first workers' house built in 1920s, 19th century mansions, 20th century residential houses, and even wooden houses, most of which unfortunately could not be preserved anywhere but in locals' memoirs. So each of the exhibition within the project will feature and combine our museum collection, artifacts provided by the residents, images of the district throughout the years, memories, as well as text on local history, literature, and poetry, interviews, and with locals. In keeping with the perspective of Lefebvre and Desserteau, the exhibition scope will be everyday life in the city, in the present and in the past, daily routes, humdrum activities, and routine practices in different Moscow districts. Coming back to the initial aims of the project, you can see them in the slide. As I told before, we are in the very first stage of this quite ambitious program and still facing some big methodological questions. As we have already mentioned, Taganka is one of the central districts in Moscow. For some people, it's simply a place they pass sometimes, or come to walk, or visit a theater, a restaurant, a club, or a shop. But what does Taganka mean for a local resident? How about a local historian or an activist? How about those who both live and work in Taganka? Old-timers, multiple generation residents, or former residents. We are curious about how the residents identify themselves according to their own unique view of the cityscape. Identity and affiliation are often defined in terms of borders or categories, or by creating contrast, with something different, like ethnic or national identity. But we are interested in a completely different approach proposed by several anthropologists. Instead of borders and categories, we want to talk about connections. We want to speak about the feeling of belonging through multiple individual and collective connections to place, stories, and people. By collecting the local stories about places important for them, about memories and past events connected to them, and about how these individual connections change with time, district development, or moving out, we are trying to learn how residents define their own belonging to the district and what it means for them. So thank you very much for your attention, and at the last slide I want to show an inhuman inhabitant of Taganka district.
Thank you very much for your statement.
Thank you very much. And now we have a presentation from our dear chair, Joana Sousa Monteiro from Portugal, and she will speak about the vegetable gardens in Lisbon, perspectives on food sovereignty, social cohesion, and a more sustainable future.
Thank you, dear moderators. Okay. Can you see the screen well? I hope so. Okay, thank you. So, dzień dobry. Good afternoon to all of you. Like cities, museums can and should contribute to the achievement of the sustainable development goals. The resolution on sustainability and implementation of Agenda 2030, Transforming Our World, was presented by the ICOM Sustainability Working Group to the General Assembly in 2019, which was highly supported. Maureen Rees has brilliantly presented the case to us on Wednesday, the first conference day, directly calling for our responsibility as city museums about this theme. The Museum of Lisbon, the capital city of Portugal, has chosen 3 years ago to delve into the topic of urban sustainability through a research and exhibition project about the city's vegetable gardens in the past and the present time. It all started by getting to know gardeners and how they work in their vegetable garden plots in municipal and also private city parks. The exhibition Lisbon's Vegetable Gardens from the Middle Ages to the 21st century started with a 2 years dialogue fieldwork with various gardeners, including migrants. The findings showed interesting data about food security, cultural diversity, and identity values coming from plants and food, which we felt we couldn't leave without further research. Teresa and Celeste, that you can see there, our friends now, were the first enthusiastic gardeners showing and teaching us how they do it, why, and how they feel about planting what they have chosen to. As the project began to unfold, we realized that Lisbon has been elected European Green Capital in 2020. Our exhibition turned out to be the Green Capital's main event, even if dwelling in between two pandemic lockdowns. The Green Capital themes, among others, were intelligent urban engagement, green growth and eco-innovation, sustainable land use, and adaptation to climate change. This resonates with some of the museum's exhibition goal to encourage sustainable local development in a global ecosystem, to embrace cultural diversity, and to promote well-being in connection to nature. Before going inside, we had to plan for the outside, that is, growing a vegetable garden ourselves at the museum. While we wait some more time to ensure the restoring of the old 19th century ruined greenhouse and make it into a hydroponic, sustainable vegetable garden for learning purposes and engagement, we built a partnership with a company that recently registered a new model of sustainable vegetable gardens, our sea garden, as they call it, of which greens and vegetables are growing fast in front of us. A model of a high vertical vegetable garden patented in Singapore and developed locally in Lisbon by a young architect studio will soon be brought to our gardens too. The exhibition opened in last October, closed again between January and April, and hopefully will remain open until the end of this year. It conveys new perspectives on the vegetable garden's history and how they have been shaping the city's landscape and the urban food system. The approach combines heritage, that is memory of a distant and also recent past, and history with newly researched data about Lisbon's vegetable gardens history. The first scenario at the exhibition shows sculptures depicting the seasons from the 18th century, alongside with fresh vegetables. The main exhibition curators are one anthropologist, Daniela Araújo, and one historian, Mário Nascimento, who is with us now attending the conference. Working along, of course, with a large pool of researchers on biology, ecology, hydraulic engineering, urban planners, city planning historians, and artists, let alone over 35 vegetable gardeners with plots in parks and their house backyards. It starts with the natural landscape of Lisbon, the exhibition, the water streams that some of them are nowadays avenues, the fertile land, and how important vegetable gardens were to monasteries and palaces over the centuries, not only for food and the economic development, but also for health treatments. Later on, vegetable gardens were equally relevant for the food supply and economic growth of military bases and public and private cottages and houses. We were also interested in how growing vegetable and plants got to be seen as scientific disciplines since the late 19th century, with the first reviews, publications, seed catalogues, and schools for plants and flowers growing, set in Lisbon. It was a time for the seed shops and rehearsal gardens. The scientific and experimental approach to growing vegetables and a wise sense of sustainability, even if they didn't use this word exactly, led to an increase in the awareness of how green areas were important to urban planning, while the rural and the urban worlds were getting more and more apart from each other. In the early 20th century, Lisbon was still a riverside city, with 40% of its territory being rural, with vineyards, olives, fruit trees, and of course, vegetable gardens. However, just 40 years later, the landscape changed completely. Almost the whole of the city area was occupied by houses and buildings, while vegetable gardens remained in cottages, in building backyards and patios. It is about city planning now, expressively, and the appropriation of urban spaces by green areas, mostly by vegetable gardens. The appropriation of urban space develops under formal models, that is, following laws and rules by the national or the local governments in regulating green areas, and also informally or in spontaneous models of occupation, the land, sometimes clandestine occupation of empty spaces, like in backyards and even along highways. Activism has been another way of appropriating urban land to increase gardened spaces and more organic food sources, while contributing to increase urban sustainability and regulate the water resources. The two examples of different associations that here are represented by these two people teach people or tend to teach people to set up a seedbed and develop agroforestry in available spaces of the city center, even if they are very small ones. Some of these activists are recent residents coming from Germany and France, working with Portuguese-born ones. One of them, Sylvain, the Frenchman you can see there, serves the vegetables they grow at a communitarian kitchen in Moraria, in one of our old town, old neighborhoods. A young architect's studio called Parto was another partner of this project. They built a complex model suggesting the option for planting or implementing a series of vertical vegetable gardens in some areas not yet completely filled up with buildings, like in hospitals' yards and prisons' backyards, and in schools and in residential neighborhood areas. A similar project of a vertical vegetable garden system is actually being developed in a neighborhood nearby, in which the museum is a partner. We try also in the exhibition and the catalog to explain some simple tools for creating sustainable vegetable gardens in cities like ours, with the help of our partners, two of our partners from the start of the whole project, coming from the science faculty of the Lisbon University, who manage themselves their vegetable garden. They teach permaculture, which is the planning of human habitats, which copy the patterns and relationships found in nature, increasing biomass, diversity, and connectivity between the elements, which adds resilience, health, and productivity to the system. We brought models of a permaculture vegetable garden in a building's backyard, in a flat balcony, in a smaller scale also, but still with the main elements like the insects hotel, the composting unit, and the plants association strategy. We also share a smaller and simple model of growing organic vegetables called Smart Garden to have in the kitchen for those who cannot plant. Going back to the beginning of this project, that is to the gardeners themselves. At the exhibition, we share 8 of the 20-ish video interviews we have made with gardeners in the city. Teresa and Celeste you met before, and other 6 people coming from very different parts of the world. They tell stories about motivation, favorite seeds and plants, what they eat, what memories come from planting and eating those vegetables that resonate with their child memories or those of their parents, and thus helping them in a different country or a different city to reconnect with their own origins. Each of them lent to the exhibition objects they cherish to go along with the videos, connected with their vegetable plots, like drawings, notebooks, and a ladybug shelter. They refer to the food they get out of the gardening, and moreover, to the peace and joy they feel when they are there, as opposed to the stress of urban daily commuting. We have also built a seed vault in cooperation with an association that documents and safeguards seeds all over the country. It shows photos of 25 gardeners, here seen as seed guardians, who have garden plots in 7 of the 21 public vegetable parks managed by the council. The most of them are migrants coming from the north of Portugal, Africa, and the Middle East, countries like Cape Verde, Angola, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Iran. They picked up their favorite seeds and grown plants, which often come from their homelands. We have, of course, like every museum, since last year, online programs, because even when the museum reopened, we cannot do the exact programs we planned for, but we are starting now again to do some city tours in the town and visits to the green vegetable parks themselves, and to a community kitchen and other places outside the museum, and of course tours inside the exhibition too. But the online programs will go on, like online talks and online virtual tours. But the exhibition also has a blog. You have the address there, where some subjects have been in depth approached, including through the voices of some gardeners themselves that are not represented in the exhibition, so to go further in more contents. The exhibition book of comments is full of inspired words and some drawings drawn by children, but also adults, and many exclamations about how this exhibition made them gain hope, how they felt inspired and keen on growing plants in their homes or parks. Even if these sensations last for short moments, we feel that it was worth it. Coming up is an open day with a group of vegetable organic producers at the museum, with an association called Agroecological Caravan. The third session of a BioBlitz that we have been delivering at the museum's garden since the last 1 to 2 years, and a series of conferences, and not directly connected to this exhibition, but to the food main theme at the Roman Theatre Museum site, about food in Roman times and how it relates to our diet. I want to finish this presentation by showing the seed bombs installation that is shown in the end of the exhibition. To sum it up, here to sum it up with a metaphor of the seed bombs, vegetable gardens are the main source of urban agriculture nowadays. They add up to food supplies. They can be agents of health promotion and certainly well-being, while developing short food chains, delivering local grown vegetables to the communities and reducing the environmental footprint of what we eat. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We are 15 minutes past the time, but we will ask the questions very quickly. Please provide short answers. From Joanna Monteiro to Alvin, do you expect your project to inspire similar ideas in museums of the region after the pandemic is over?
That the project will inspire museums to go beyond museum walls, to work with their communities, to bring vibrancy to the neighborhood. The projects may be especially relevant to city museums located in neighborhoods where there are traditional trades and businesses. But however, I just want to add that it would actually require resources such as manpower and funding. And so that might not be the top priority for museums, when they reopen post-COVID. And as a general concluding comment, I just want to say that I feel that museums should always be open to learning from one another. And I think that museums worldwide are already doing that, and you can see this in museums sharing their digital strategies as well as their safe management guidelines, measures for COVID-19. on the part of Singapore museums in Singapore, we have learned a lot from the guidelines issued by organizations such as the American Alliance of Museums, ICOM, Network of European Museum Organizations, and even National Museum Directors Council. Thank you for your questions, Joanna.
Thank you. And we have a question from Joyce Kinyanju to Anna Trapkova. Is the museum funding coming from the government?
Yes, it is. Most of the budget come from Moscow City Council, city government.
Thank you very much. Quick question and a very quick answer. And we have one more question from Yvonne Mazurek, and it's to Joanna. Have any more traditional gardeners shown resistance to more innovative approaches like permaculture or hydroponics? Do you mediate between traditional perspectives and gardens from a newer, even hipster take on that activity?
Great question, Yvonne, thank you. I don't have a good enough answer to give you, I think, at least not about the hipsters, but yes, we have been dealing with more traditional gardeners and more innovative ones. I couldn't explain more during the talk because it would be too long, but in the exhibition itself and the videos and the texts, you can, if you can come to Lisbon before the end of December, we can actually watch the differences between them. So they are not all activists or innovative, but we dwell in between the traditional gardeners that reconnect with their origins, especially migrants, and not so scientific. They don't have a scientific approach or a formally expressive, sustainable approach, and the other type of gardeners that are in principle more people that have graduates course that are linked to universities or to associations of changing the city, linked to urban planners also, both formal and informal ones, and some of them real activists. So thank you.
Although this is the closing session, let us now do something that is forward-looking.
A welcome to CAMOC Barcelona 2021 from Joan Roca and the Muhba team.
Well, it's quite difficult to talk after these wonderful presentations from Moscow without outskirts and Lisbon socially sustainable. And well, we will try to do our best to present how to continue talking about that with the motto, connecting cities, connecting citizens towards a shared sustainability. First, I will give you some ideas and then we have a video for you. First idea, come back to Barcelona. Well, you come back to Barcelona because we have already been in Barcelona. Do you see it correctly?
Not yet.
Not yet?
We see you, not the video.
You don't see, no, the video, you don't see the PowerPoint?
Not yet. No. You should share screen.
Yes, I think it's shared. Just a moment, I will try to share. Yes, here we go. Just a moment. Is it okay now?
Now it's okay.
Now it's okay. So, sorry, we lost a minute. I'll go fast. We'll have to continue. with connecting cities, connecting citizens, after what we have been hearing those days, towards a shared sustainability. Well, after all, you come back to Barcelona because the pre-CAMOC organization has been in Barcelona in 1995. So for the Barcelona CAMOC meeting 2021, it's 26 years after. So welcome home again. Connecting cities, connecting citizens through 4 sessions. Reorganizing the city museum, reporting the city, building citizenship, and then a workshop about city museums in expansive metropolises. Let's go to the first one, reorganizing the museum. The city museum, I think that after what we heard in Krakow, it's quite clear, is a center of research, knowledge, and innovation in history, heritage, and museology. That seems very evident, but that's not so evident for everybody. And now we have to deal with new technologies and new formats in a fast urban changing environment. For example, that's a kind of project of the 7 doors or the 7 portals or the 7 entrances to city knowledge through our museum. We think that we have to really change completely what has been done in digital work before. We have to really create a new digital museum that can be really the basement for the presential, the physical existing museum. Or, for example, that I think that we have to innovate in formats. We can publish, we can do many lectures, we can research, breaking the limits between education and culture, between innovation and diffusion. So that's important, and we have to reorganize the museums. Second, reporting the city. City museums are the portal and the mirror of the cities they exhibit. The city is their subject of study and action at multiple scales, from metropolis to the neighborhoods. We were talking about that first some minutes before. Reporting the city requires a coherent narrative of urban processes. So we have to be academical and popular at the same time, and history matters. For example, archaeology can be very useful to show how in other historical contexts, links between cities prove to be very useful for sustainability, for cultural exchange, for a better life. We are not inventing the world. Remember that in the Middle Ages, when authoritarian rule was everywhere in Europe, die Stadtluft macht frei. The cities were much, much more free. Or, for example, at the same time, different scale, we have to talk about urban majorities, about how people live. We have to talk about that for the quarter, for the neighborhood, for the visitors. The most important thing to have the same language for everybody is the way to not to be local or not to be far away, both local and universal. As William Carlos Williams said, universal is local perfectly realized, perfectly done. 3, building citizenship. Why for a city museum organized to create knowledge about the city and to show it to everybody? Well, to create citizenship in a world in which states are not always doing their job for social cohesiveness, for cultural cohesiveness, and city museums can really be very useful because they can put in contact very different worlds. They can broaden the basis of cultural democracy and they can rethink tourism. We are not a place just for tourism. We are the summit of a pyramid of thought, of cultural industries, of urban thought, of urban democracy if possible, and of visitors. All that, not only for visitors. And then we have to do that through contemporary collecting and reinforcing the autonomy of the museum through social engagement. In Madrid, they asked what to do when you are under, well, some power. Well, if you have many links, you can do it. So all that we will think in Barcelona about all those questions with a workshop too, city museums in expansive metropolises. First, the hidden potential of city museums. In a fast-growing city, the city museum can be extremely useful. Many examples were there those days. And then the Four Meridians project, which is specifically for African and European cities, which are in the same meridian, so to say, and which are not very much in contact through museums. Hidden potential of city museums, that's El Alto, La Paz, Bolivia. Look at that, you say, oh, a market, but look at that, it's the same city in the last 10 years. So innovative and creative cities can really be something unexpected, and we have to analyze how to get it. Or the Four Meridians project. Look, that's Maputo in Africa 100 years ago. That's Maputo, Africa nowadays. So really, city museums can be a tool to enhance new ideas, new projects, putting together people from different places, from the academy, from the quarters, from the institutions, volunteers, everybody. And to finish with that, we will have a fourth day for those in Barcelona of optional visits. Visits through the museum and visits through other city actors. Through the museum, we will try to get the point to show you how we try to deal, in that case, we will do our best. We try to deal with the city as a whole, from city center to the outskirts. We want a city without outskirts. So that really matters for everybody. To the literary perspective, this is our literary house. To the world heritage, that is Park Güell, as you know. To the question of how to cope with excessive tourism, to deal with tourism after all tourists are citizens, to the sustainable city through parks. And to do that, we cannot do it by ourselves. Cities are, in the 21st century, the most important network in the world to ensure that democracy, a better life, is possible for as much people as possible. Connecting cities, connecting citizens towards a shared sustainability is the project in Barcelona. And now, finally, let's go to the video that I think that it's ready in Krakow. So Krakow, hello, hello. Can you please put the video?
quiero trabajar. En el 57 me dice, ¿te quieres ir a las calderas? Digo, coño, las calderas.
Intenta hacer fotos de todo, documentar todo, el suelo.
Pese que és segura, pese que ja és qüestió de documentar, és un procés de producció.
Per quin motiu feia aquestes xerrades?
Nel processo de transformació.
La transformació de la vida dels habitants.
Tota la meva activitat era a fabricós.
¿Ves si tengo que ser fabricós de las mujeres?
La idea d'aquest cicle de guitarra és del Museu d'Història de Barcelona, que té una de les seves seus a la Casa del Guarda, al Parc Wildt.
Paren el día soldándose en la luna.
El MUBA ha montado una fiesta con una visualización de dos viviendas, pero en medio de la plaza.
¡En mi cama!
No, la casa és
la misma.
La casa és.
La memòria deforma la història, però sense memòria no podem viure. I sense història tampoc.
I don't know how about weather in Barcelona, but if you look back over there, you can see that Krakow is crying for you, and we are now a city in rain. These are the tears of rain after you, our distinguished guests, and that means that time has come for the closing speeches.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have the honor to ask the hosts, the director of the Museum of Krakow, Michał Niezabitowski, to take the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, after 3 days of virtual sailing across various cities, our ship has safely reached the end of its journey. Visiting various locations, we focused on 4 phenomena: localness, the inclusive right of all residents to their place, revitalization, and combating post-truth. We try to learn about experiences of cities and the diverse transcription of the strategic developed by city museums in order to present historical, urban development and cultural heritage. This has allowed us to get to know a little more about the diversity and richness of cities located on various continents. Our virtual meetings has proven the idea of Andy Murfield that today the city becomes a public space not because of specific physicality or centrality or even the ownership of land, but because it is the place where the virtual and physical worlds meet, where offline and online conversations come together, where people meet in the internet and outside of it. I think that the 21st century has brought about, not only during the pandemic, an interesting phenomenon which shows that our common good, the city space, is no longer divided into public and private, but into passive and active. The latter encourages meeting, and the internet means that the modern city no longer needs a regular agora, which is getting replaced by a combination of the real and the virtual worlds where you can manifest your right to the city. And this is precisely what has happened thanks to our guests, the amazing speakers. I would like to thank you all for that. Thank you for the inspiring presentations, and thank you for being an active audience. But most of all, I would like to thank the CAMOC committee for making this conference happen in spite of the difficulties on several postponements. Once again, I would like to thank you, Joanna Monteiro and Jelena Savic, for them hard work. A big thank you also goes to the entire team, including, but not limited to, project manager Krzysztof Haczewski, his assistant Mariusz Gat, promotion and social media Magdalena Rusekarska, contacts Michał Grabowski, streaming and audio video editing Marcin Jancik, Piotr Cieślik and Robert Kubiec, IT Paweł Zasuń, animations and visuals Mirosław Bury, and last but not least, to our masters of ceremony, Ksymena Plater-Zyberg and Piotr Krasnowolski. Once again, I'm sorry that we were unable to meet in person, but our invitation to visit Krakow is still open, and I do believe that we will soon be able to see each other here and feel the city with all our senses. At the same time, I would like to invite everyone for the next, hopefully just exciting journey, this time to Barcelona. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, and may we now have the honor to invite the chair of CAMOC, Joana Sousa Monteiro.
Thank you. So if you let me, dear Director Michał Niezawitowski, dear fellow colleague of CAMOC board, I will go on with your maritime metaphor. You called me in your opening words 3 days ago, captain of CAMOC, because I am chair of CAMOC still. Now let me call you, oh captain, my captain. You have performed a brilliant online conference, dear colleague and dear friend. You, the whole Museum of Krakow team and the whole team from the city of Krakow have exceeded all our best expectations possible. I can only but praise sincerely all your efforts and all your work in putting this brilliant conference like it was, and the efficiency of yourself, Michał Niezawitowski, of Krzysztof, of Magdalena, of Michał Grabowski, of you two, your amazing moderators that were really very, very, very good. And all the others that you mentioned, and I cannot say your names, I'm sorry, because I haven't met you yet. You know that I was always feeling like being in Krakow as much as I could, because I love that city. And I have very, very good memories of working with you there. And we just loved the image, the photo that Camilla, shared with us, because it reminds me of the Waliców and other festivities we have seen in Krakow before the pandemic, of course. My second word is to praise the speakers. The keynotes were amazing, and let me stress Sławek Soy coming back to live events and to CAMOC conferences in Krakow, even at the distance. And I'm sure the next CAMOC conferences to come in the near future. And all the speakers, because it was really like amazing from the start until the end, including the presenters of Ignite sessions, so well organized, and the posters, producers and presenters. The last word goes to my fellow colleagues and friends in CAMOC that co-organized with the Museum of Krakow this amazing conference. First to Jelena Savic. I keep calling her our super secretary because she is a super secretary. She is a super everything, actually. Thank you, Jelena, for all your brilliant work as always. And also to Jenny Xu. She helped a lot in the backstage in many aspects. And also to Sarah Hendrick, to Catherine Cole, to Jan Gershaw, to other colleagues that have been all along with us. And also, not yet in the board, but also very, very important CAMOC members that have worked a lot for this to happen like it did, Andrea de la Place and Glenn Perkins. Goodbye to you all, and hoping very much to see, if possible, in person, all of you, all and each of you in Barcelona in December. Thanks. Thank you. Krakow.
Thank you very much, madam. Thank you for all your kind words, and goodbye. Let us join all the organizers and all the thanks to the organizers, those who created the concept and those who made sure that the technology that connects us actually works.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is sadly where CAMOC Krakow Digital Conference on the right to the city ends.
We've been here for you for 3 days, 2.5 days of the sun, and now the rain crying after you in the Museum of Krakow, in Krakow, obviously.
Do come to Krakow and visit the city in the real and not online world.
To hear the actual bugle call from the taller tower of St. Mary's in the main market square.
To meet Lykonik, the Krakow pony.
And to meet us, Ximena Plater-Zyberg
and Piotr Krasnowolski.
Thank you for being with us for these 3 days.
And see you again in Krakow
and
enjoy Barcelona.